Chapter 114. Gustav listened to the words of the students around him with a poker face. He was also analyzing the battle and understood how it turned out to be this way. Gustav was learning a lot from all their battles. He had taken note of the pros and flaws of the battles. After some time had passed again, the second duel began. It was Blackrock School against Atrahia City High this time. Angie and the rest of her 6 teammates were prepared to duke it out with Atrahia City High participants. Their faces showed determination and fierceness. Although everyone had judged that they would fail, Blackrock School were not ready to give in just yet. Once the go-ahead for the battle was given, they immediately put their plans into motion. The battle went on for about 10 minutes before the first participant of Blackrock School was sent flying out of the ring. Blackrock participants did all they could to win, but in less than 5 minutes another participant from their side had been thrown out. Now that they had brought in 2 substitutes, only 1 slot was left, and it was looking like they would be making use of that 3rd slot anytime soon. "I can't lose like this. He's watching," Angie said in her mind as she dashed backward to dodge a large rocky like palm. She was currently keeping the captain of the opposing team in place since he was responsible for sending 2 of her teammates out earlier. Angie had been running around him with her normal speed, so she wouldn't spend all her energy at once, but she noticed that just like their former opponents, he was starting to recognize her movement patterns, so she decided to take her speed up the notch. Her other teammates were busy dealing with the rest. The captain of Atrahia City High was a half-rocky monster now with thick rock-like muscles protruding out of different parts of his body, especially his knuckles. When his fist touched the former 2, it tore through their body like it was tofu. Angie was pained by that, so she decided to be the one to take him on. Even if they were to lose here, she didn't want her teammates to suffer in his hands. "Let me defeat him myself then," Angie said internally and dashed out again. Swoosh! A 3rd horn protruded out of her forehead. She arrived in front of Captain Zim. The entire audience and Zim were shocked to see her growing a 3rd horn out of nowhere. Zim swung out his fist towards her, but his hand phased through thin air as Angie swerved towards the side and appeared behind him. She pushed out both her arms towards his back with speed. Bam! Zim was pushed 50 feet forward by Angie. Now the audience along with Zim knew what the 3rd horn was supposed to do. Angie had become so fast that she was literally a blur. She bolted forward again with extreme speed, while the Zim's fist turned into a long pointy rock which he stabbed forward at her. Angie was able to dodge this thrust with ease again, and her hand located a part of his body that wasn't covered by rocks before thrusting out her palm again. Bam! Zim was once again pushed back by about 30 feet. The entire audience was amazed. Angie didn't wait for more than a second before dashing out again. Swoosh! Bam! Swoosh! Bam! Swoosh! Bam! The captain of Atrahia City High was being pushed around for a few seconds. He was unable to follow Angie's speed. "I'll run of energy if I don't go back to my normal form now." Angie came to a realization after dashing out again. She decided that she would inflict a serious injury on Zim this time before reverting to normal. Angie dashed towards his left this time as her sight closed in on his rib area, a few centimeters below his armpit. Since the Zim thrusted out his fist again, he was wide open. Angie gathered up a lot of speed in her arms before throwing a fist towards that part of the captain's body. The air rippled with intensity as the fist arrived before his body. All of a sudden, Angie remembered what happened when she used this attack before and changed her mind. She opened her palm and turned her fist into a palm strike. Bam! The captain was pushed back again, but surprisingly, he wasn't injured in any way. Angie stood in place with a confounded look as her horns retracted. The amount of speed generated before she thrust out her hand was enough to break through a wall, even though it was weakened when she turned it into a palm strike. Earlier, she felt her palm struck a hard surface. She stared at the captain. She noticed his smirk. "I hate speedsters like you. You really give a lot of problems, but it's not hard to predict your moves after taking a beating for a while. But I hate you more than I hate any other speedster," he voiced out before dashing forward. "Even though I put up that fake weak point to fool you, that could have still been a lethal injury for me had you decided to truly attack me. But you're being nice, eh?" the captain shouted out as he thrust his fist towards her face. Swoosh! Angie dodged towards the right, causing the fist to miss her by a few inches. Now she understood what had just happened, and also the fact that she could have broken through his defense if she punched instead of using a palm strike. Even as her horns had retracted, she was still faster than the captain. She dodged him repeatedly and was about to attack him again when he suddenly paused his movements and raised both hands to connect them. Pa! Immediately he clapped his hands together. Small, diamond-like stones shot out of his body in hundreds. Prick, 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 prick. It took everyone by surprise because he never used such an attack before. Projectiles from his body shot across the battlefield, stabbing into some of the students. Plop. I really dislike goody two-shoes like you. The captain of Atrahia City High walked towards Angie as he spoke. Angie was laying on the ground with sharp stones pierced into different parts of her body. Her legs were pierced by more than 10 of them and were currently bleeding. You really have the guts to be nice on the battlefield? The captain bent and grabbed Angie by the neck before lifting her. Her face shone pain with the way his rocky hands were tightened around her neck, but she wasn't powerful enough to free herself from his grasp. Chapter 115. The battlefield is not for soft-hearted weaklings like you. Zim arched his right arm back as he spoke. He stared at a part of her body where some of the stones he shot out earlier penetrated. One of the pointy stones was protruding from her left belly area. He pushed his palm forward with intensity towards that location. Bam! His palm slapped onto the rock, pushing it further into her belly and causing blood to spurt out. Blurg. Angie vomited out blood as her face turned pale. Her face showed extreme pain at the moment, and it looked so heart-wrenching. Zim still kept holding onto her neck and lifting her. He arched his arm back again and thrust out. Bam! This time it was a stone on her left shoulder that was pushed 7 inches into Angie's body, shattering her collarbone. GHRRHH. Angie exclaimed in pain. She felt indescribable pain in her left shoulder area. Her left arm fell weakly to the side. She was unable to raise it again due to the pain and her collarbone being shattered. Lutmego. Angie muttered weakly while spitting out more blood. Weaklings don't get the chance to make demands. Soft-heartedness is for the weak. Zim pushed his hand forward again. Bam! His palm pushed another stone that pierced into her right side, deep into her body. Blood oozed out of Angie's body from the 3 spots Zim attacked. She had never felt such pain before, and even though she tried to fight Zim using her right arm, it was all fruitless. Bam! 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 Zim repeatedly attacked all the spots where Angie's body was pierced, causing her to bleed out. Blood oozed out of her body and fell to the ground in small droplets. Gasp! The entire audience was surprised about the sudden brutality their view was being subjected to. Dash, what is he doing? Dash, why is he attacking her like that? Dash, she doesn't need to be subjected to such pain. Just throw her out. Dash, bull. You shameless prick. The student uproars could be heard clearly, especially from Blackrock students. Zim acted like he didn't hear their complaints. He threw Angie's body to the ground, causing her back to slam onto the hard ground with intensity, and started walking towards her again. This bastard. Why can't he just throw her out? Is all this necessary? Lim was incensed seeing the way Zim was handling Angie. Angie is being violated. Why isn't the principal of Atrahia City High saying anything about this? Elle said with a squeezed-up face. Ariana stared at the ring with a dark look also. The usual look of playfulness on her face had disappeared. Even Principal Airhill hasn't said a word, which means unless Angie passes out or gets thrown out, he can't interfere, Elle stated. Everyone knew just how tenacious mixed bloods were, so passing out wasn't something that would happen anytime soon. In the west corner where the principals were seated, Principal Airhill of Blackrock School currently had a look of anguish on his face as he spoke. What is the meaning of this, Principal Dirk? He voiced out. What is the meaning of what? Principal Dirk asked with a confounded look. Can't you see what your student is doing to mine? Principal Airhill said with an incensed tone. What do you mean, Principal Airhill? When did we mention that this was against the rules? From what I see, your student is still conscious. Principal Dirk replied with a dismissive look. You know that this goes against morals. If your student wanted to throw her out, he could have done that already. Why does he have to make her pass through such tortures? She should be disqualified since she can no longer fight. Principal Airhill stood up with a look of anguish as he spoke. Moral? Ha ha ha. Principal Airhill must be a comedian. Principal Dirk laughed for a while before his face suddenly turned serious. On the battlefield, the enemies will show no such morals when killing your beloved students. She should learn the consequences of her actions. The battlefield is not a place for soft-heartedness, Principal Dirk stated. But you. Before Principal Airhill could complete his statement, he was interrupted by another principal. I agree with Principal Dirk. That student could have dealt him a huge blow but chose not to. She's suffering the consequences of her actions. The battlefield is not a place for mercy. Principal Irwin also spoke. Some other principals also agreed that no rule was being broken here. Principal Airhill had no choice but to take his seat with a look of defeat. Back in the spectators area, the three girls were still thinking of what to do. We can't just leave that bastard to keep handling her like that, Lim shouted out with a look of anguish. At this moment Zim raised his foot and stomped down on Angie's leg. The sounds of bone cracking could be heard clearly as he did that repeatedly. You bastard! What are you doing? Let her go. Ariana had tears spilling out of her eyes as she attempted to jump out of the spectators area, but Elle and Lim grabbed her. The barrier will prevent you from going in, Elle said. There was a kind of protection set around the rings that prevented entry when battles were going on. It was possible to throw someone out, but impossible to enter until the battle was over or the officials willed it. Some of the audience had disturbed looks on their faces as they saw the captain of Atrahia City High stomping on Angie's leg repeatedly. The stones that had pierced into her legs earlier were now embedded deep within. Angie's other teammates within the battlefield were being handled by Atrahia City's high participants. W high Areyu do ingths? Angie still hadn't passed out even after being subjected to such an amount of torture. Her voice trembled in pain as she spoke. Her entire outfit was soaked in blood, and her body shivered occasionally due to the intense pain. She still couldn't understand what she had done wrong. When did showing mercy become a bad thing? She wondered internally. You're a speedster, right? Stomp. Those legs. Stomp. I will make them incapable of running. Stomp. After stomping in all the stones, Zim picked Angie up again. At this point, she had lost feeling in her left leg, while her right leg hurt like it was crushed by a moving truck. Not that she knew how that felt, but she had never felt such intense pain. In the spectator's seat, Gustav had been staring at the battlefield while leaning forward with his jaw resting on both of his arms. Soft-heartedness doesn't belong on the battlefield. Zim's words drifted into his ears. Even though it wasn't loud, his perception allowed him to perceive the small echoes carried by the winds. Gustav, what do you think we can do? Lim asked with a look of helplessness. Gustav slowly removed both hands from underneath his jaws and stood up. Stay here, Gustav said while turning around to leave. Chapter 116. What do you mean by stay here? Angie is being brutalized. We have to do something. Ariana voiced out like an animal brandishing her fangs and ready to bite Gustav if he responded with an unsatisfactory answer. Gustav turned to look at her and placed his hand on her head. It's gonna be fine. Remain here. Gustav sounded calm when saying this, but a sudden chill permeated the environment as he turned around. Everyone in that vicinity could feel the chill infiltrate deep into them, but they couldn't understand where it was coming from. It felt like something crazy was about to go down. Before the girls could react to Gustav's last statement, he had already disappeared into the distance. Only the crowd of students, most seating while some standing, could be seen. In Blackrock participants' seating area, the substitutes and the others that have been disqualified had their mouths open wide as they stared at the battleground. Their seating area was very close to the battle ring, so they could see on a much closer and clearer scale than the rest of the participants. Falco, it's time for you to go in. You'll be the last substitute entering, the coach of the team said towards a boy with white hair sitting on the second line. Falco looked a bit timid upon hearing that. He stared at the battlefield where only about 3 participants from Blackrock School were left in the ring. Others had been disqualified, and right now the participants of Atrahia City High were messing around with the ones that were left. Coach, I think the battle is pretty much over. I going in there will not change anything, Falco replied. No, Falco, you must get revenge for us. The other side will wake if they treat you the same way, so you're the only one that I can think of, the coach said with a decisive look. Coach, you know I can't control it, Falco said with a pale face. Falco, stop arguing and go up there, the coach commanded. Coach, I have to use the restroom. I've been holding my pee for a long time. If I head to the battle ring this way, I might piss myself when taking a beating, Falco said and stood up. The coach stared at him with a suspicious look, but decided not to forcefully put him in the battle with a full bladder. Falco walked out of their seating area and towards the nearest restroom. After a minute had gone by, the coach was about to pick another person to go in, thinking Falco wasn't going to show up. He was fed up with watching Angie receive torture over and over again. It was truly a triggering sight, and he wished he could interfere, but he wasn't allowed to. Embark, coach. Can I go in now? Falco said with vigor from the side as he approached. The coach was a bit surprised by the look of confidence, but there was no time to think of arguing about that. Go in. I can't stand this anymore, the coach voiced out. Falco nodded and walked towards the stage, catching the attention of the crowd. Hey, Blackrock is putting in another substitute. What is the point of adding a substitute now? He's just going to end up like her. He looks pretty weak also. The students watched as the barrier around the stage opened up for Falco to go in. They were worried about what was going to be the outcome again. Zim was torturing Angie on the southwest part of the battlefield. The participants of Atrehia City High noticed the newcomer and started moving towards him with nefarious intent written all over their faces. Falco stared at the southwest corner and noticed that Zim had raised Angie again. This time his right fist transformed into a pointed stone-like diamond. He arched his arm back to the limit while holding Angie up. Angie at this point was almost at the brink of losing consciousness, but she could still see that Zim was about to stab right through her with his diamond-like fist. DLNTI, haven't T to LD chime YT, she muttered weakly as more blood trickled out the side of her mouth. No cares about what a soft-hearted weakling says. Zim stabbed towards her stomach with his diamond-like fist as he spoke. 3 participants of Atrehia City High had also surrounded Falco at this point, but he suddenly dashed out of the encirclement. Swoosh! His speed was faster than they could react to. They turned around and noticed that he had arrived before Zim and Angie. Zim's hand was close to stabbing through Angie's belly when Falco suddenly appeared in between them. Tum! Zim's diamond hand collided with Falco's chest, but instead of penetrating, a metallic sound rang out. Zim pushed his diamond hand forward with a look of confusion, yet it couldn't pierce through Falco's chest. Who are? Before he could complete his sentence, he noticed a palm headed for his chest with an intense speed that it sounded like the air was being torn apart. Fwoosh! Although Zim couldn't counter due to his speed, he wasn't worried in any way since his chest was defended by a rocky surface. Bam! To his surprise, when the palm made contact with his chest, the rocky surface cracked from the impact and he was pushed back by about 70 feet. He subconsciously let go of Angie when he was sent flying by the palm strike. Angie's body dropped from the air listlessly. Grab! Falco turned around with speed and quickly grabbed onto her body before she could fall to the ground. He lifted her princess style and stared at her face. He didn't know why, but he could feel a rage building up inside him upon seeing her blood-soaked face. Her body was also covered in blood, and holes could be seen on multiple parts which were pierced by sharp stones. His face turned extremely dark as he walked towards the edge of the battle ring. "They'll be back. Just wait right there like a good little boy for me," he said to Zim without turning around. Zim stared at Falco's back with a look of astonishment. The palm strike he received earlier rocked his internals to the core, causing him to feel pain within his chest. His defense was top-notch, and no one had been able to do that to him with just a casual attack. "Who is this person?" he voiced out with a confused look. Falco arrived at the edge of the ring where 2 medics were already waiting. He passed Angie over to the man. "Please take care of her," he said, and turned around to head towards Zim again. The medic nodded at him and turned around to go give medical attention to Angie. "Now shall we begin?" Falco voiced out while staring at Zim. Chapter 117. Now shall we begin? Falco voiced out while staring at Zim with a chilly gaze. I don't know who you are or why someone as strong as you are would only be arriving at the battlefield now, but what I did was necessary, and am sure you can agree with me. The battlefield is not for soft-hearted weaklings. Zim said while trying to put on a righteous look. Soft-hearted weaklings, eh? What about hard-hearted weaklings? Falco asked with a solemn look while taking small steps forward. The battlefield is not for weaklings at all, whether soft-hearted or not. Zim replied with a look of revulsion. Good, I'm glad you admit that it's not for weaklings, Falco said as he moved another step forward. 10 times of what happened to her should also be inflicted on weaklings, don't you think? Falco asked with a small smirk forming on his face. 10 times? Looks like you're edgier than I am for you to say I should have inflicted 10 times the pain on her, ha ha ha. I really like you. We should become friends after I send you out of the ring today. Zim said with a light burst of laughter as his cracked rocky chest started mending. 3 participants from Atrahia City High were already encircling Falco from 3 separate directions. You misunderstood me. You see, that girl is 1,000 times stronger than you are, which means you guys are the true weaklings, and since we both agree that weaklings should be dealt with, guess who's next on the menu? While speaking, Falco clenched his fist so tight that popping sounds echoed around the vicinity. What? You idiot, even if you're stronger than I am, I still have the advantage in number. You. Before Zim could complete his statement, Falco suddenly dashed forward unexpectedly. Swoosh. He appeared in front of the 3rd student on the right like a phantom. Whoosh. He jumped high in the air and spun around with his leg swinging forward. Bam. His leg accurately smacked the participant on the left side of his face, sending him flying while spitting out blood. The other 2 were shocked once again by the speed and quickly activated their bloodline ability before dashing towards Falco. Black flames erupted from the body of the one participant on the left, while the one on the right turned her arms into green tentacles. The tentacles elongated and turned into large hammers which she swung towards Falco. At the same time, a ball of black flames that were as large as half of a human shot forward with intensity, burning the air and causing the temperature to increase significantly. Falco turned around to face them and dashed forward once again with speed. When the tentacles, hammers, and black fire were about to make contact, he suddenly bent his body backward. He descended so low that his back was nearly touching the ground as he slid across it. SHHHSSHH. The fire and tentacle hammers missed his body due to the descent. As his body slid across the ground, he suddenly slapped his left hand on the ground and used it to support the weight of his body before spinning with intensity. Swee-eye. His legs along with his body rotated and swept across the ground in a circular format. Pa. Pa. His feet collided with their legs in the process, causing their legs to be swept off the ground as their body flipped repeatedly across the air. Bam. Falco used his hand to push his body upwards, and while the 2 participants were still rotating in midair, his body lifted as high as 3 meters, and he proceeded to reach out both his hands to grab the 2 participants' heads while in midair. He pulled both heads towards him and slammed them together with force. Blam! The sound was similar to 2 watermelons getting crushed. Blood squirted out of both their heads as they fell limply to the ground. Gasp! The entire audience was in shock. Dash, how does Blackrock have a strong participant like this? Dash, why wasn't he used in the initial round? These words circulated around the spectators' seats. Lim, El, and Ariana stared at the battle ring with suspicious gazes. They recognized Falco, but they couldn't understand why the coach would let him on the battlefield when he couldn't control what was within him. Falco was said to have awakened a bloodline that gave him a powerful but uncontrollable alter ego. Whenever his alter ego was in control, disaster always occurred depending on where he was at that moment. Most times they would be able to keep it under control since the alter ego's strength didn't surpass the Zulu rank, but other times they weren't so lucky. There was a time it took control of him when he was still in middle school and he ended up killing 2 of his classmates. This was hidden underneath the wraps since he was from a rich family. Luckily, as he grew, he was able to keep his alter ego in check. It only forcefully took over his body when he was in danger. The difference between him and the alter ego was the opposite personality. Also, Unknown black tattoos would suddenly appear all over his skin. The coach, on the other hand, stared at the battlefield with an astonished expression. This was what he wanted after seeing Angie get tortured. He still had a look of suspicion mixed in with astonishment, because he hadn't expected Falco to be able to do this without being controlled by his alter ego. He knew it was impossible for Falco to harm anyone in his normal state due to Falco being a soft-hearted wimp, but he couldn't understand why there were no tattoos on his body. The tattoos signified that he had been taken over, but right now he couldn't see them on Falco's body, yet the way Falco was currently dealing with the oppositions was just as ruthless as the alter ego would be. Back in the ring after Falco had slammed their heads together, he landed on his feet and kicked both participants on their chests, sending them flying once again with caved-in chests and blood spilling out of their body parts. He didn't even mind that one of them was a girl. Zim had wanted to attack severally when Falco was dealing with them, but he decided to activate an advanced bloodline ability before he engaged Falco. Chapter 118. When Falco turned around, he noticed that Zim had grown 2 feet taller, bringing him to a height of 8 feet. Also, he was now as wide as 2 adult males joined together. White rocks had covered every part of his body from head to toe. Hardly any openings could be found on his body upon transforming into this new form. Zim bore no semblance to his former self in this state. He looked like an abominable monstrosity at the moment. "Do you still dare to call me weak after seeing this?" Zim asked while taking steps forward. "Bom. Bom." His steps were like that of a titan. "Do you think covering up your weakness with a hard surface makes you any less weak?" Falco replied with a question of his own. We shall see who's weak and how you're going to successfully harm me," Zim said, and raised his arm to shoot out pointy stones at Falco. Tua, 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 tua. Hundreds of pointy white stones shot out from his rocky hand towards Falco. Sway, sway, sway. Falco swerved from left to right and right to left across the place with a speed that was comparable to half of Angie's highest speed. Even with that, he was still able to dodge the projectiles accurately as he kept moving forward. Swoosh! All of a sudden, Falco's speed went up by a notch, and he dashed forward amid the rain of pointy stones. Zim was nowhere close to being as fast as Falco, but his eyes were able to follow his speed. He reacted by swinging out his left fist just as Falco arrived in front of him. His large, rocky fist that was almost twice the size of Falco's entire face traveled towards him from above. Falco scrutinized the fist traveling towards his head at a slightly slower pace. He reacted by raising his left arm with speed. His left hand extended from underneath and pushed the large arm up, causing Zim to lose balance and stagger backward due to the sudden push, but before his foot could stomp on the ground after staggering backward, a palm tore through the air with speed and slammed into his chest. Boom! A loud blast resounded across the place as his palm slammed heavily onto Zim's rocky chest, pushing Zim back by a few feet. The effect this time couldn't be compared to the last time when he hadn't taken this form. It was weaker, which meant that his defense had increased. Falco had already confirmed this after blasting him backward with that strike. "Let's see how long your defense can keep up," Falco said internally as he raised his palms and dashed out again. Only he could see the whitish wavy like light surrounding his palms as he engaged Zim again. In a large technological environment, a 300-story tall building stood out majestic in another business area of the city. This building was shaped to look like armor, which was silver in color. It gave off a very exquisite feel. The security detail around the building was so tight that it could be mistaken for a military base. On the highest floor of the building, 2 people stood in front of each other. It was a man and a lady, both with cold looks. They weren't just on the highest floor, but actually on the rooftop of the building, which wasn't constructed in a way that people could stand on. The roofing was slanted, so it was very surprising that both of them could stand on it with ease. Tiny roads and buildings that looked like Lego toys were visible from this height. It was beautiful to see small mist gather around the rooftop of the building, and all this was due to hay. The atmosphere would have been at peace if not for the 2 people standing in front of one another, positioned in the middle of the large roof. The male was a man with dark brown hair and handsome cold looks, while the female was a young lady with ash-colored hair and a beautiful but extremely uncaring look. "What are you doing, young?" the lady asked with her glare intensifying. What am I doing? Well, obviously I'm here doing nothing right now thanks to you, Amy, young Joe said with a playful tone. Stop acting a fool. You and I both know what I'm talking about. What is the purpose behind the dangerous mixture? The lady who happened to be Miss Amy asked with a slightly disturbed look. Ah, so the MBO has failed to find any meaningful information against me, and now they requested for you to come here and inquire. Pathetic. Young Joe said with a light smile grazing his lips. It was unnatural how the coldness on a person's face could increase even when the person was smiling, yet young Joe looked just like that. I'm not just here on behalf of them. This is an investigation that I've taken upon myself, and I'll warn you to better keep hiding and hide well, because once I get solid evidence that you're responsible for that, you will lose all your protection and I will finally be able to hurt you, Miss Amy said while staring into his eyes. Haha, all right, good luck with that, but why are you interested in this case? Is it because of your student? Young Joe asked with a look of interest. He seems pretty interesting for a kid with an F-grade bloodline, bad parental upbringing, no friends, bullied repeatedly due to low bloodline grade. His whole life till this point has been nothing short of distasteful until he defeated my little brother and his small gang, those idiots. I'd say this is when his life started to get a little bit of color, then you came along and started training him. It is unknown how he became as strong as a higher-graded mixed blood, and he also went through a brain tweak session without suffering harm, yet he managed to fool a certain someone about being brain dead. If this kid is truly getting stronger, and you just happen to be training him, maybe you should be the one getting investigated instead, since you're breeding a monster. I'm sure you know it too that such a kid mindset must have been warped by the way he was treated in society. What happens when he becomes a very powerful figure in the future? Hee. Do you think such a kid will choose to be on the good side of the same humans that were on his bad side? Chapter 119. Miss Amy's face suddenly turned colder upon hearing young Joe's words. We're done here, Miss Amy stated and turned around. She walked towards the edge of the rooftop on the right side and paused before turning around to stare at Young. Just a little warning. Stay clear of him. The next time you touch him will be the last time you touch anyone, Miss Amy voiced out with a provocative look before jumping off the 300-story building. Shwai. Young Joe stared in the direction she had just jumped from with a playful grin on his face. Now that I know you care about something, what stops me from using that against you? He muttered with a cool tone. Back in the battle ring, Falco was currently dealing with Zim. Bam, 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 bam. The sound of collisions rang out as Falco's palm struck Zim's chest, shoulders, and face consecutively. Crack. Another crack appeared on Zim's face and chest area. Zim roared in pain and made spiky rocks grow out of his body. The spiky rocks also grew out of his fist as he threw it towards Falco. Falco swerved to the right and dodged the hand with ease. He bolted forward and leaped up while raising his knee. Bam! His right kneecap slammed into Zim's rocky jaw, causing a lot of rocks to blast apart as Zim was sent flying several feet backward with a look of pain evident on his face. Falco didn't give him the chance to catch his breath before sending out a fist after landing. This would be the first time Falco was going to punch Zim, so he made sure to pour a lot of strength into his right arm before throwing it forward. A whitish light covered his right arm as it traveled with intensity towards Zim's face. Bang! His punch landed cleanly on Zim's face, causing him to stagger backward even more with his rocky face crumbling. Falco dashed forward and arched his arm back once again before throwing it at Zim's stomach. Bang! 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 Numerous amount of punches rained down upon Zim. One punch after the other slammed into his body non-stop. More rock-breaking sounds rang out across the entire training ground. In a few minutes, Zim had been reduced to a pitiful state. Not only was he unable to land a single hit since the beginning, but his protective outer covering had also been completely destroyed, and now he was receiving those brutal punches on his bare body. Bang! 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 He received 3 furious punches from Falco again that caused him to vomit out another mouthful of blood. At this moment, his face was full of blood and most of his teeth were uprooted when he was receiving the barrages in his rocky form. Zim landed on the ground with a look of pain visible on his face. Right now, he had expended his energy, so transforming into a rock again would be impossible, and even if he did, he knew Falco would just beat him back to his original form again. Falco walked towards the battered body of Zim, which was laying on the ground, and squatted before him. "Remember what we said about weaklings?" Falco asked before grabbing onto Zim's neck and lifting him. "What did we say about weaklings?" Falco asked while tightening his right hand on Zim's neck. "Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. Oh, sorry, was my grip too tight?" "Ah, you won't answer me? I guess I'll just continue then," Falco said before increasing the force of his grip on Zim's neck. Zim's eyes bulged as he winced in pain. He clawed, kicked, and punched repeatedly, but it was to no avail. After some seconds, Falco decided to relax the grip on Zim's neck and proceeded to release him. Plop. Zim fell to the ground while clutching his neck in pain. He kept coughing repeatedly. Due to this, he didn't notice that Falco had gone to pick up all the pointy stones around the battlefield that had fallen off his body. After picking up a lot of them, he held one in his right hand and raised it before throwing it out. Sway. A diamond-like stone flew through the air towards Zim and stabbed straight into his left chest. "Ugh." Zim voiced out in pain as his body started bleeding again, but before he could touch it, more of these small pointy stones were thrown out. Swee-eye. Sway. 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 Falco threw out the stones in his hands with speed towards Zim. Poochie. Poochie. Different parts of his body were pierced by the stones thrown out. His chest, arms, legs, belly, face, thighs, etc. Falco only stopped after the 50 stones in his possession were exhausted. Not a single one of these stones missed. All of them were embedded in different parts of Zim's body. At this moment, Zim was looking like a porcupine. Falco didn't look like he was done. He walked over to Zim and grabbed him by the neck before lifting him once again. Zim was bleeding from almost every part of his body right now. Now the main event is about to start. "You remember what you did to her next after this, right?" Falco asked in a low tone. Zim shivered in pain and fright as he heard that. Falco proceeded to arch his right arm backward before sending it forward at full force. Bam! His palm slammed the pointy stone on Zim's chest in first. "Erg!" Zim shouted out in pain, but this was only the beginning for him. Falco repeatedly thrust out his arm back and forth, slapping more pointy rocks into Zim's body in the process. Zim was in so much pain that he didn't notice his neck was currently pierced in by Falco's finger. Requirement for bloodline acquisition has been met. Analyzing host compatibility with flesh-hardening bloodline 0% per 100%. Analysis complete. 89%/100%. Host compatibility with flesh-hardening bloodline is 89%. Does host desire to acquire this bloodline? Yes/no. Principal Airhill, what is the meaning of this? Is it necessary for your student to do this to mine instead of just throwing him out? Principal Dirk voiced out with a tone of annoyance, while pointing at the battlefield where Zim could be seen receiving numerous punches from Falco while being lifted in the air. "What do you mean, Principal Dirk? The battlefield is not a place for mercy. Didn't you just say that a while ago?" Principal Airhill said with a burst of light laughter. Chapter 120. What do you mean, Principal Dirk? The battlefield is not a place for mercy. Didn't you just say that a while ago? Principal Airhill said with a burst of light laughter. What happened to the morals you spoke of earlier? Are you not supposed to uphold them? Principal Dirk voiced out with anguish. Morals? That sounds richly hypocritical coming from you. On the battlefield, the enemies will show no such morals when killing your beloved students. Do these words sound familiar? Principal Airhill stated. Principal Airhill, how could such an upright person as yourself be fine with what is going on? Principal Dirk said with a frustrated tone. Principal Dirk's student needs to learn from this just as my student did. It is for his own good, Principal Airhill said with a righteous tone. Principal Dirk was about to retort again when other principals started speaking up. Principal Airhill is right. I wonder why Principal Dirk wants other students to learn but is adverse to his own student learning. Principal Dirk should stop throwing a tantrum. Your student can learn from this experience. The other principals agreed with Principal Airhill one after the other. Principal Dirk had no choice but to back down. He felt twice the frustration Principal Airhill felt earlier due to this and could only watch Zim get beaten up. Bam, 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 bam. The audience had lost count of the number of times Zim had received punches while being held up in the air. All the pointy stones had been embedded in his body completely, all 50 of them with average lengths of 5 inches and a maximum of 7 inches. No one could imagine the amount of pain he was going through, and even with that Falco still kept punching his belly and chest repeatedly. They thought Zim was ruthless when handling Angie, but now they knew his actions couldn't be seen as ruthless compared to that of Falco's. Congratulations! Host has acquired flesh-hardening bloodline. Falco, who was obviously Gustav in disguise, finally stopped hitting Zim after he saw the notification appear in his line of sight. "This will be your punishment," Gustav said internally as he threw out his fist towards Zim's chest for the last time. Bang! Zim's chest caved and his back arched out as his body was blasted backward by over 70 feet before slamming onto the ground. He slid across the ground for a few more seconds before his body came to a stop. His sternum had cracked, his collarbones were shattered, his body was pierced in more than 50 different places, his forehead and face had wide holes where he was bleeding from. Gustav knew Zim wouldn't last long before dying after having his bloodline stolen, which was why he made sure that Zim's body crossed the line after receiving that punch. The medical team was able to gain access to his body fast enough and started giving him medical treatment immediately. Most of the audience had their mouths wide open after the battle came to an end. It couldn't even be called a battle, it was more of a one-sided beating. Zim's rocky state was durable enough to withstand bullets and powerful collisions from cars, so no one expected him to be easily beaten like that. Even Echelon Academy participants had to resort in using the force from the blasts of the landmine to throw him into the air before their captain, Andrew, kicked him out of the ring while in midair. They won due to strategy while not power, but in this battle, he lost completely in terms of power. There were still about 3 more participants in the battle ring who were in a good state. They could still fight if they wanted to, but they had been scared shitless when they saw the way Falco was beating Zim earlier. They were afraid that he would transfer his aggression towards them since it was pretty obvious that Zim was receiving such brutal beatings because of what he did to Angie. Gustav turned around to glare at the participants that were left. Immediately they saw the cold look. They flinched back once again and ran out of the ring. Blackrock Schools win. A loud announcement rang out after they all crossed the line. Cheer, cheer, cheer. Gustav walked out of the ring amidst the cheers of the crowd. Most of the students weren't pleased with Zim's actions earlier when he brutalized Angie, so they saw Falco's action as a heroic deed, especially students of Blackrock Schools. Gustav walked towards the Blackrock School's seating area with elegance. His eyes scanned the area where Angie was being treated. Elle, Ariana, and Lim were surrounding her. They had looks of relief on their face, which made Gustav believe that Angie was going to be okay. Gustav didn't go to the seating area. He walked towards the path on the side that led out of the training field. This path also led to the restroom. He didn't bother answering the greetings of anyone, including the call of the coach. He didn't want to risk anyone knowing that he wasn't the original Falco, so he quickly headed for the restroom. Looks like his alter ego is still in control. Blackrock coach felt that this was the case since Falco didn't answer anyone's call or react to the crowd cheers. The normal Falco wouldn't do that, and this served as a perfect cover-up for Gustav. "I will need Principal Airhill's help to bring Falco back." The coach started walking towards where the principals were seated. When Gustav arrived in the restroom, 3 notifications popped up in his line of sight. Hidden quest completed, hidden side quest completed, emergency quest completed. Angie finally opened her eyes an hour after the match had ended. She found herself lying on some kind of transparent stretcher around where Blackrock participants were seated. Gustav. This was the first word she mentioned upon waking up. Angie. The 3 girls beside her shouted out with joyful looks. Elle grabbed her right hand. Ariana grabbed her left hand while Lim caressed her face. Angie saw the faces of her friends and smiled. Her smile was so warm and beautiful that it made it look like she had forgotten about the incident that occurred with Zim. "Are you okay?" Chapter 121. Do you still feel hurt anywhere? Say the word and he'll have that bastard killed. The 3 girls voiced out at the same time, but Angie seemed to be looking around like she had lost something. "Where's Gustav?" she asked. The three girls' smile froze as they heard that. Gustav had disappeared over 30 minutes ago, and they hadn't seen him since then. "Hello," Elle was about to say when a voice was heard from the side. "I'm here." A cool masculine voice was heard from behind. The girls turned around and noticed Gustav walking towards them from the spectators area. Gustav arrived before Angie and asked, "Are you okay?" A sweeter and broader smile appeared on Angie's face as she reached out to grab Gustav's right hand. The three girls remembered when Gustav told them to leave the situation to him before disappearing for over 30 minutes. They had a feeling that he played an important role in what had happened with Zim and Falco. Maybe he helped in persuading Falco to join the battlefield. The girls had no idea that Falco was actually Gustav during that time, so they linked his disappearance to that. "Thank you," Angie said to Gustav with shimmering eyes. Thanks for?" Gustav asked with a confused expression. "For taking me out of the battle ring," Angie replied. "Taking you out?" Gustav said in a confused manner. Even the girls were also dumbfounded. Angie, that was the doing of Falco," Elle stated.
No.
Angie said, "That wasn't Falco." The girls stared at Angie with a look of confusion mixed in with bewilderment. A part of them wanted to believe this when they remembered the way Gustav left the other time assuring them that it was going to be okay, but when they remembered the rumors they heard about him being an F grade, they felt performing such a feat would be impossible. The whole situation seemed suspicious since Falco's alter ego wasn't as powerful as what was displayed on the battlefield and also never took over without tattoos appearing all over his body. Angie had also told them many times about how Gustav was strong enough to defeat mixed breeds and surpass her in speed, so right now they were confused about what to believe. Which abilities does Gustav bloodline grant him? This was a question no one knew the answer to, including Angie, since Gustav had never used bloodline abilities in anyone's presence. They turned to look at Gustav to listen to what he was going to reply with. The event ended for the day later on. Blackrock schools decided to sit out the finals even though they had the opportunity to battle Echelon Academy for the win. Due to this, Echelon Academy won first place while Blackrock schools were second, but they weren't bothered about it. Now that the event had ended, schools would be going back to their cities the next day. News had already circulated about how Zim was unable to use his bloodline abilities since the fight ended. Everyone laughed at him, thinking he had been beaten to the extent that he didn't remember how to activate his bloodline. They all felt it was a psychological situation, and he would probably be able to use it after he got over his fears, but they had no idea that he no longer has a bloodline. The real Falco was found passed out in the restroom. When he woke up, they asked him about the battle, but he was unable to recall anything about what happened. He claimed he wasn't responsible for the situation until video proofs were shown to him. This made the coach of Blackrock believe that Falco was truly taken over by his alter ego, which was why he couldn't remember a thing, but what bugged him was the absence of black tattoos all over his body, and why the alter ego didn't go on a rampage like it used to, because the alter ego didn't know friend from foe. Even though there were suspicions, no one knew that Gustav was responsible for the whole situation. Even if they suspected him, one would wonder how he would be able to defeat Falco, who had a powerful alter ego that would awake when he was in danger. Of course, when Angie and friends suspected Gustav, he denied having a hand in anything that happened earlier. They had no way of confirming that he was involved, neither was there any proof to justify Angie's claims. That night, Angie spent a lot of time with Gustav in the arcade alone. She had already been given the best medical treatment, so she was able to heal up before the day came to an end. They had a short conversation about what happened today, and Gustav warned Angie that if she carried on this way, she would suffer a worse fate in the future. He told her that if she was going to remain a nice person even on the battlefield, then becoming a fighter wasn't for her. This led to the conversation of what Angie truly wanted to do in the future. Her answer greatly surprised Gustav. "I want to join the MBO." "You what?" "I want to join the MBO. Do you remember I mentioned wanting to save people? I can only do that by joining the MBO. Angie, do you think this is a joke?" "A joke? What do you mean?" "You are too soft-hearted. Do you think you can kill enemies on the battlefield with kindness?" "But, being, what happened today is just the start. If you ever joined MBO in the future with this same attitude and mindset, you won't live long. You want to hit enemies' kindness, but do you think they'll be merciful when returning your attack? Are you so naive as to believe the world out there will return the same kindness you've shown them? Do you really think enemies will treat you any better because you showed them kindness? Get a clue. You can't save anyone on the battlefield with kindness. Instead, you'll end up getting more people killed since you are not ruthless enough. So, what do I do? Angie asked. Gustav paused for a few seconds and stared into Angie's eyes before answering. You need to learn the difference between friend and foe. You need to learn how to not treat your foe like a friend. It was supposed to be a date, but Gustav used that night to drill these things into Angie. Angie listened to everything Gustav said with a crestfallen expression. She knew everything Gustav said was correct, but she couldn't bring herself to truly cause harm to another person unless it was a beast, but Gustav threatened her with something. If you don't change, we will never be companions within the MBO camp. If you cannot learn how to be ruthless to your enemies, your companions will suffer the consequences. Chapter 122. Tell me, Angie, do you think anyone will want to be companions with a person that can cause their death? Gustav asked. Angie stuttered repeatedly. There was no way anyone would want that, and she knew. If you cannot change, people will die, and you won't be able to save anyone in the end. Gustav went back to his room after his discussion with Angie. Although their discussion made the atmosphere turn a bit sore, Gustav didn't regret telling Angie all that. Right now, he was interested in checking the rewards he received from completing 3 quests at a time. Gustav sat on his bed and opened the notification bar in the system interface. Hidden quest completed. Information. Defeat a participant. Rewards. Plus 10,000 EXP. Plus 1 all stats. Palm strike level up. Hidden side quest completed. Information. Participate in the duel event. Rewards. Plus 10,000 EXP. Plus 10 extra attributes points. Dash level up. Emergency quest completed. Information. Save Angie. Rewards. Level up. New ability unlocked. God eyes. Gustav stared at the 3 rewards that came from completing the quests. He was satisfied with the rewards the system dished out. God eyes. Looks interesting. The reward that really caught his eye was the new ability that was unlocked. He decided to check out his skills and abilities in the system interface. Skills and abilities. Dash. Level 4 Sprint. Level 3 Regeneration. Level 3 Shapeshifting. Level 1 Joint Movement. Level 3 Toxin Immunity. Level 3 Recreation. Level 3 Bloodline Acquisition. Level 3 Slash. Level 3 Chop. Level 7 Palm Strike. Level 4 God Eyes. Level 1 God Eyes. Level 1 Abilities. Zoom eyesight. See clearly in dark places and view a person life signs. Gustav was amazed seeing what the new ability could do. He could zoom his eyesight now with this and also see in the dark. Although he could practically see in the dark without this ability when he was scanning everywhere with his perception, he still liked that this was a new ability. The only ability of God Eyes that he didn't understand was the last one. Life signs? What are those? Signs of life? Even though it sounded simple, Gustav had a feeling that it wasn't. He had never heard anything about life signs before, so he was clueless as to what it was supposed to be. Gustav decided to try out the new ability since it did not require him to do anything absurd first. God Eyes has been activated. Gustav's irises glowed a combination of scarlet and green upon activating God's Eyes. Whoa! Gustav was amazed as an entirely new world appeared in his line of sight. The room had turned into a world of different colors that depicted different things. Inanimate objects around him were blue, and they all had different number readings placed on them. Some glowed brighter than others and had more numbers, while others were a bit dim compared to the rest with lesser numbers. His eyes traveled towards the balcony where some flowers were planted and used to decorate the place. In his line of sight, the plants were bright yellow in color. They could even be mistaken for gold. The plants also had numbers on them, and also some weird micro-symbols which Gustav couldn't understand. These micro-symbols weren't present on the walls and other inanimate things when he stared at them. At this time, there were more than 2 roommates here, so Gustav decided to check them out with God's Eyes. He was once again astonished when he saw that 2 of his roommates had different colors from that of the plants and the inanimate objects. Their bodies were made of crimson, blue, and yellow glowing colors. Gustav could also see that these colors would occasionally brighten then get a little dimmer after that. Then he notices the micro-symbols that were present on the plants were also present on them. The difference was, it was only located on their foreheads. He still didn't understand what they meant. The one beside his bed had a degree on his forehead, while the one on the other side had a increment. Gustav kept staring at these symbols, trying to see if he could figure anything out about them. Mixed blood life sign degree has been successfully saved. Mixed blood life sign increment has been successfully saved. Gustav stared at the system notifications with a look of confusion mixed with intrigue. So those are life signs. Gustav now understood a bit, but this only brought him more questions. What are life signs and what are they used for? He wondered, but no matter how much he tried to, he couldn't come up with anything. He also tried using it as a skill and called out to it repeatedly just to figure out its purpose, but it was of no use. After trying and failing to figure out anything, Gustav decided to try how far his sight could travel. He stood up and walked over to the balcony. He stood before the balcony where a small pool of fishes could be seen within the glass that served as a rack to prevent people from falling off. Gustav looked down. The ground, which was more than 800 meters away, stared back at him. Gustav could see the people down there look like ants due to distance, but they seemed to also emit colors. He could see the combination of red and blue in some, while he could see red and yellow in others. Of course, he couldn't see them properly due to distance, so he decided to zoom his eyesight in and see how far it would take him. Gustav's sight traveled downwards, zooming in on everything located on the ground. The people walking on the ground that looked like ants in the distance slowly started becoming bigger and bigger. Gustav's eyes didn't stop zooming till it reached around 200 meters in length. He was able to calculate the zoom in length, based on the number of floors his sight passed by while zooming in. Gustav recalled his zoomed sight with a look of astonishment. This could really come in handy, Gustav said internally. Chapter 123. Apart from seeing things in different colors, Gustav could zoom in on a particular place with the normal sight, which meant if he wanted to use the ability without seeing colors, he could decide not to. Gustav walked back to his bed with a smile. Looks like attending this event wasn't a waste, but I wonder why Miss Amy said this place is more dangerous than Plankton City. I never sensed or saw any form of danger, Gustav wondered as he lay down on his bed. I wonder what Miss Amy is up to right now. So this is why? A beautiful lady sporting gray hair stood in front of a glass barricade. This was a hidden underground facility, and the lady seemed to have broken in. People in white medical robes laid on the floor in different positions of the large room. They were taken out by this same lady. Within the barricaded glass walls was a large green rock. What is this energy it emits? Why does it feel familiar? She wondered while staring at it. It doesn't come from this world, that's why he wants to crack it open and use whatever is within for his selfish purposes, she muttered with a look of understanding. But what is this sense of familiarity I feel coming from it? The next morning the schools departed for their various cities. It had been a fun event, even though some unexpected things happened. Everyone that got new friends due to this event wished to one day meet up again. Echelon Academy and Blackrock schools had the same destination, so their buses would occasionally meet with one another during the road trip back to their city. Their road trip was supposed to be eventless, but something crazy happened. I don't want to keep dragging this arc, so we're skipping that scene. It will be told as a side story in the future. The students got back to their homes by nighttime. The first thing Gustav noticed when he got back to the neighborhood was the slightly somber atmosphere. When he and Angie were walking through the street, people were pointing at him and muttering words. Gustav was able to use perception to catch a bit of what they said, and his face turned dark upon hearing them. The first thing he did was visit Angie's father. It is just as you heard. A mixed breed attacked while you were away. What? How could that be? I killed one a day before I left here, and it hasn't been a week yet. The neighborhood believes you haven't been doing your work, and they've made a petition to skip your pay for this month. Oh, is that so? Yes, it would seem they believe you haven't earned it. No one knows about you killing a mixed breed a day before. If not for the good officer who just happened to be patrolling around at that time, there would have been casualties. The month hasn't ended yet, has it? There is still more than a week left, which means enough time to make you guys regret your decision. After saying this, Gustav stood up to leave, but Angie's father called for him to wait. Please, Gustav, don't do that. Angie's father already understood what Gustav's meant by his statement. He didn't want the neighborhood to suffer due to this misunderstanding. All you need to do is talk with the people of the neighborhood, Angie's father suggested. There was a small gathering where Gustav was able to converse with the people of the neighborhood. He's not doing his job. Imagine leaving us to danger for the past 3 days. He has never protected us since the start. He just keeps collecting payment for undone work. Yes, he never protected this neighborhood but receives payment. No, I believe he has done quite the job observing the neighborhood during the night time. Also don't forget that he saved this neighborhood even before he became an observer. Have you ever seen a single mixed breed attack the neighborhood again since he became the observer? Exactly my point. Not a single mixed breed has attacked since then, which means he hasn't done anything. Yes, he's not doing his job if he hasn't killed a single mixed breed to protect our neighborhood. Most of the people in the neighborhood felt Gustav hadn't done anything since he became an observer, while others felt this wasn't the case. From the start, Gustav didn't say anything till Angie's father gave him the signal. Gustav just walked to the front of the gathering while holding on to his storage device. Zing, 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 zing. Decapitated heads of different mixed breeds appeared on the ground in front of the gathering. Bloodwolf, Savernia serpent, mutated ape, etc. Gasp. The entire gathering was in shock. They immediately recognized these creatures. Those who were speaking earlier about Gustav not protecting the neighborhood kept their mouths shut upon seeing these heads. Angie's father walked to their fronts to speak. I think this already says a lot about what happens during the nights when you all are sleeping soundly. From behind, Angie had a look of surprise also. Doesn't this mean he has been dealing with them himself? She recalled that they had never run into any mixed breeds during their night patrol together. She never knew that Gustav had been killing them himself. The meeting ended with the neighbors apologizing to Gustav for their conduct. Gustav went back to his apartment afterward to plan his next steps. He had missed his apartment during the last 3 days, even though he hadn't been here for long. Another mixed breed attacked the neighborhood, Gustav couldn't help but think that something was wrong somewhere. The attack from mixed breeds usually came once or twice a month before he started living here. Then it increased to once a week, and now it seemed like it would be coming twice a week from now on. Gustav wondered what will become of the neighborhood when he left here. Will they be able to hire another mixed blood? I have to find a way to get through the border and investigate how the mixed breeds keep crossing it. Gustav came to a decision. For the next few days, Gustav trained his gravitational energy container bloodline and focused on channeling his bloodlines to their next points. The system was currently upgrading itself with the energy he absorbed from the astrobic tank. Upgrading system, 34/100%. Since the system started upgrading, he hadn't been able to access it. No quests were issued, including the daily tasks. Even though there were no daily tasks in the last few days, Gustav still did the exercises because he was used to them. He had learned a new skill with his gravitational energy container, and he was ready to try it out where the border was located. At night, he was going to patrol the neighborhood alone, and that would be the perfect opportunity for him to try it out. Nighttime came and Gustav left his apartment for the border. In a few minutes, he had arrived there. He stood in front of the green and blue wall made of lines that extended upwards with a look of astonishment. The amount of energy he could sense coming from those lines was overwhelming. He could tell that his body would be turned to ashes if he made contact with those lines, which had him wondering how the mixed breeds were able to escape from there, since they were weaker than he was. Gustav activated his gravitational energy container bloodline. Although the system wasn't available to use at the moment, he could still use his bloodlines manually. It was harder, but he had gotten the hang of it in the past few days. Energy container. Gravity circulation. Gustav placed his right and left index fingers together before using them to draw invisible circles in the air. He moved across the place and did this several times before clapping his hands together. Immediately he did that. More than 100 milky glowing circles appeared in front of the border. Truant. The lines from a small part of the border below was being sucked into these circles. All the circles focused on absorbing power from that particular point. The circles begin to get filled up with some red-colored energy. After a few minutes, a small opening could be seen forming in front of Gustav. The energy from that part of the border was being absorbed at a rapid pace causing the opening to expand even more as seconds passed. Swoosh! Gustav immediately dashed through the opening just as it became big enough for him to fit through. The circles outside were already filled to the brim with energy, so they couldn't suck any more energy. A few seconds after passing through the border, the opening closed up. Chapter 124. Immediately Gustav went in what appeared in his line of sight was a dense forest of tall trees. Within this was the continuation of the forest behind, where Gustav usually patrolled during the night. There was a slight chill in the air due to fear of the unknown, but Gustav had already kind of prepared for this. There was a small green bracelet on his wrist. Troyan. He tapped the bracelet, and a holographic map was displayed before him. The holographic map floated in the air and levitated till it got to the level of his face. Zing! The holographic map turned into light particles and entered Gustav's head. Immediately after that happened, the map was perfectly displayed in Gustav's mind. He got this map from Miss Amy, and it was the map of the entire border region where the mixed breeds lived in. The area within the first border was more than 3,000 miles of land mass, so Gustav knew it would be impossible to cover the entire border completely within a month, but he had planned to keep coming back here until he discovered how the mixed breeds kept passing through the border. Miss Amy had labeled some parts of the map as danger spots where powerful mixed breeds that were on par or even stronger than she resided. She had no idea that Gustav would try something as crazy as this. If she had known, she would have told him that these creatures could sense him from a mile away. Gustav already knew which spots to avoid and decided on which parts of the forest to visit. From his entry into the border, he could already sense mixed breeds in large numbers ahead. This place might be good for farming EXP, but I have no idea if EXP will be counted when I kill mixed breeds since the system is still upgrading, Gustav said internally as he started moving forward. He had two reasons for entering the border. One was to investigate the weak mixed breeds crossing the powerful border, and the other was to farm EXP since this was the living place of mixed breeds within the city. He was sure he would find a lot of mixed breeds here. He only had to be careful so he wouldn't run into a mixed breed he couldn't handle. Swoosh! Gustav used silent advancement along with dash and ran across the dense forest. Fwoosh! Swoosh! Fwoosh! Swoosh! As he ran, he swerved left and right, dodging the trees in the process. It was a bit hard to use silent advancement without the system, so Gustav still occasionally caused the wind to whistle. His perception picked up on something up ahead, and he quickly came to a stop. He turned to his left where a 35-meter-tall tree could be seen with red leaves and branches that were similar to that of an evergreen conifer. Gustav squatted a bit before leaping up into the air. Tum! He ascended more than 7 meters in the air before grabbing onto one of the branches and used it to pull himself upwards. Once he got to half the height of the tree, he stopped climbing higher. He looked around his surroundings, where similar trees could be seen, and jumped forward. Tum! 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 Gustav leaped forward from one tree branch to the other. After crossing over 300 feet by leaping from tree to tree, Gustav came to a stop on top of a tree that was 68 meters away from a small cave. He squatted on the thin branch and stared at the cave entrance. Vroy! 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 Huge mammoth-sized red worms could be seen wriggling back and forth across the place. They had some yellow spiraling scales on the surface of their skin, but overall they were red-skinned. Some wriggled out of the cave while some were going in. Others moved around the vicinity. Gustav counted their numbers and noticed that there were more than 20 of them moving about right now. He guessed that the cave was their home, and they happened to live together. Solar worms, said to emit unbearable temperature into the surroundings that cause human skins to melt when they sense danger. Gustav recognized these worms. The ones present here also happened to be level 4 mixed breeds according to the map. What he wanted now more than anything was to check out the cave for anything suspicious, but he was worried about their numbers being higher than what he could handle. He knew his defense could probably put up with one of the worms if it emitted an unbearable temperature, but what if 100 or more solar worms did that? Would he be able to escape unscathed? From what he heard, they had fire resistance, so there was no way the severe increase in temperature would harm them. The only thing that Gustav believed he had to his advantage was speed. The solar worms happened to be very fast, but dash made up for that. Another problem was he couldn't activate sprint. When he ran, he could only increase his speed to dash level. His speed couldn't get to sprint level, and he supposed it was because of the system upgrade that was currently happening. His speed using dash was now around 300 feet per second, which was also similar to the solar worm's speed, but they were a little slower. Gustav's arms bulged and red furs grew out of them as his hands turned into paws. His legs also transformed into that of the blood wolf, becoming slanted and showing 4 long and sharp-looking toenails. Surprisingly, apart from these changes, the rest of Gustav's body was still looking normal. During the past few days, he had learned how to restrict blood wolf transformation and make it only affect the parts of his body that he wanted it to. With the system inaccessible, he had been doing everything manually, and this made him come up with that idea. His current partial transformation gave him more mobility. He didn't have as much mass as the blood wolf in his current state, yet he could move as fast. If he coupled that with his original speed or dash, it would put his speed above that of the solar worms. Swoosh! Gustav jumped down from the tree while swinging his claws downwards and landed directly on one of the solar worms. Slash! KRYYSHH. His unexpected slash cut a 59 inches deep gash into the body of the solar worm, leaving it on the brink of death. Gustav threw his claws forward again and divided the worm in half with his second attack. TSHH. Molten-like blood oozed out of the dead worm, causing the ground to get roasted by its scorching heat. Squee, 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 squee. After performing that action, every solar worm within the vicinity made some weird shrieks with loud voices before bolting crazily towards Gustav. Chapter 125. The solar worms' bodies suddenly started glowing a reddish-brown color. SSHHHSSS. The temperature of the surroundings started increasing rapidly. Gustav's first thought was to engage the second solar worm that was closest to him, but upon feeling the intense wave of heat that permeated the environment, he changed his mind. He initially thought it would be nothing serious since there were only about 20 solar worms in the vicinity, but now he realized just how wrong he was. His upper black clothes were burned off in an instant, revealing his small but well-toned muscular frame. The environment became so hot and dry that Gustav felt 10 times the hotness of desert couldn't be compared to it. He immediately turned around to head towards the west side of the cave. He felt stinging burn pains already across his body while escaping the AoE. His skin had already turned beet red. Squee, 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 squee. The worms chased after him crazily from behind, but were unable to catch up. Some were slightly faster than others, so Gustav wasn't able to shake them off, but the slower ones got left in the dust. What's with this incomplete information I keep getting? Gustav had the urge to facepalm while running within the dense woods. The information on the solar worms that he sourced stated a particular amount of temperature that each worm emits. He calculated the rise of the temperature in the surroundings based on the combined temperature of the 20-plus solar worms and concluded that he would still be okay if they were to activate the power of their bloodline, but to his surprise, the temperature was way higher than that. He wondered how it would have felt if there were more solar worms in the vicinity. The trees and other things that could be found in the environment were unaffected because they had adapted to this habitat. The current state of the solar worms served to further enrich them. Also, some of the solar worms had speeds that were higher than Dash, unlike the information he saw on the web. There were a lot of skills he couldn't use with the system unavailable, and sprint was included. Gustav reckoned that this wasn't the first time such a thing was happening. He still wondered why the information given wasn't up to standard and decided that next time, he would source for information on mixed breeds from a more secure site. Gustav got to a particular part of the forest and leaped upwards. Tum! He grabbed onto a tree branch, which bent a little due to his weight before catapulting him further up. The worms beneath paused in their tracks and slightly raised the upper part of their body to stare upwards. They could see Gustav ascending the tree at a rapid pace. Squee! The worms immediately darted towards the tree. To Gustav's surprise, they started climbing upwards with speed. This was another piece of information that wasn't added, and Gustav thought it would be impossible for them to climb a tree since most mixed breeds can't retain a lot of the properties that existed in the animals they originated from. Just like the solar worms were originally worms, and a worm would be able to climb up a tree while a mixed breed that seemed to have originated from that wouldn't have those basic properties. At this moment, only about 7 solar worms had caught up with him, while the rest were still far behind. The temperature had reduced to a bearable amount now. He kept jumping upwards, heading from lower branches to higher branches. This tree was about 57 meters tall, and each solar worm was around 3 meters in length, so they weren't too big to climb it. Gustav got to a height of over 50 meters and stared at the worms climbing up with intensity. When they were close to getting to the branch he was currently squatting on, he jumped down. Swoosh! His body traveled downwards with speed for about 5 seconds before he landed on the ground. Bam! Gustav landed and looked around him. Only about 6 worms were in the vicinity. 5 had climbed up the tree while around 9 of them were still behind, trying to catch up. Swoosh! Gustav dashed forward with intense speed and swung out his claws, which were coated in a whitish glow. Swai! The side of the worm was cut open with hot blood spilling out. Gustav dashed backward to dodge the hot blood that was jetted out. Another worm had leaped towards Gustav when he attacked the first one, so when he leaped backward, he was leaping towards the worm. He extended both his arms in separate directions while in midair and slashed down in an X format. The solar worm was completely severed into 4 different parts. Splush! Blood blasted in all directions, and some of them fell on Gustav's chest. HSSH. Some thumb-sized holes were burned through his flesh and penetrated deep into his body. Ugh! Gustav landed on the ground and dashed towards the side while holding his chest. The hole in his chest showed his blood vessels. Damn! I should be more careful, Gustav muttered with a look of pain. Although the blood really hurt and did damage when it fell on his body, his regenerative ability kicked in, so his chest was starting to close up at a fairly rapid pace. Tush! One of the worms on the left spat out a silver-colored liquid towards Gustav. Swoosh! Gustav dodged it by a hair length and dashed towards the creature while brandishing his claws. Slash! 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 He hacked at the solar worm several times, turning its body into shredded pieces of meat. The liquid shot out earlier had eradicated some fallen trees in the surroundings. It had a powerful corroding ability, but it also released a kind of gas into the atmosphere that puts the human senses to sleep. So even though Gustav was not hit, it was slowly starting to affect him. Gustav knew about this, but he still had to deal with the solar worms in the surroundings, so there would only be a few left when the ones on the tree and behind caught up with him. He moved from place to place, slashing at the solar worms. Chapter 126. His speed was still faster than theirs, so it looked as if a phantom was moving across the place. His body was moving like the wind, dashing from place to place as he hacked down the solar worms one at a time. He was using atomic disintegration to coat his claws while slashing at them, which made it easy for him to penetrate their bodies. After dealing with the 11th solar worm within the vicinity, Gustav dashed towards the east side. He had inhaled a lot of that gas, and now his body was starting to feel numb. After distancing himself from the previous battle site, his body started regaining feeling again. The worms that climbed up the tree earlier along with the rest in the vicinity had started chasing after him. Once again, however, the temperature in the surroundings had decreased significantly after killing 11 of them earlier. Sigh. What a waste of good EXP, Gustav lamented internally. The system upgrade was still ongoing, so he couldn't get any EXP from killing these mixed breeds. Tush! Gustav stared behind him and noticed another stream of silver-like liquid headed towards him from behind. Swoosh! He swerved towards the right, dodging it, but that wasn't the end. Tush! 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 Several more solar worms fired those streams at him, and he had to dodge repeatedly. Swoosh! 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 Gustav was able to dodge them by moving sideways occasionally until about 9 worms fired the stream from their mouths at the same time. Tush! 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 Gustav sensed it coming from behind him and discovered that it had covered a large amount of space, so it would be impossible for him to dodge sideways this time. He wasn't quick enough to pull that off. As the streams of liquids closed in on him, Gustav suddenly squatted slightly while running. His leg muscles bulged intensely before leaping upwards with as much strength as he could muster. Tum! A small cloud of dust scattered across the surroundings from the point where he leapt upwards. His body ascended to 12 meters in the air as his arms reverted to their normal state, and he grabbed onto a thick branch of a tree with his palms. He used the force generated from leaping upwards to spin backward, while holding onto the branch with both his hands before swinging his entire body in the opposite direction. Whoosh! His body traveled across the air, towards the solar worms. The silver liquids had missed him by traveling forward underneath his body that was flying across the air, and since the solar worms just spat it out one moment ago, they couldn't use it at the moment. In midair, he transformed his body into the mutated bull, causing the dropping force of his body to increase exponentially due to his weight change. Bang! His feet, which were coated in white light, landed directly on the upper body of a solar worm that was about 200 feet away from the tree he just swung out from. Poochie! The upper body of the solar worm was pierced through by Gustav's entire lower body. He found himself inside the body of the worm after this had happened. The internals of the solar worm stuck to his body like a piece of clothing. He placed both hands on the body of the worm and pulled himself out of the hole he created with its body. The body of the creature fell limply to the ground, creating another massive pool of molten-like blood. Tom! Gustav immediately jumped towards the side, dodging another stream of liquid that slammed into the corpse of the solar worm he just killed. The liquid pushed the solar worm's body backward, slamming it into a nearby tree. Bang! Gustav had already dashed out again after dodging this attack. He didn't transform his body back into that of the blood wolves. He was still in mutated bull transformation mode. He threw his fist towards the face area of the worm. Bang! The worm was sent flying and crashed into several other worms behind, but no severe damage was done to them. Gustav did this on purpose to throw more than one worm off balance, so he wouldn't be attacked by so many at a time. He quickly transformed back to the initial form, blood wolf form, he took at the start of the battle and charged towards them again. If he decided to keep using the mutated bull, it would take a while for him to deal with them since its only attribute was strength, but strength wasn't what was needed to deal with the worms since the thickness of their outer covering was high. This is why he had been using the blood wolf's form all this time. Coupling it with atomic disintegration was the easiest way to penetrate their thick skin. Swoosh! Slash! Gustav arrived in front of one again and slashed out several times. His claws tore the solar worm's body into several pieces of meat, causing weird shredding sounds to ring out in the air. Gustav didn't pause for a second. Once he was done with hacking one into several pieces, he would move to the next one and do the same. Swoosh! Slash! Slash! Swoosh! Slash! Slash! In a few minutes, only 2 solar worms were left in the surroundings. Gustav's body was covered with dry blood. He had gotten some of their blood on his body when killing them. The hot blood tore open his body at that time, but he was able to endure the pain and keep fighting them without backing down for even a second. Physical pain is nothing compared to what I faced for years, Gustav said internally as he darted towards the remaining 2. Even the solar worms hadn't expected to encounter someone so crazy in their entire existence, since other mixed breeds were scared of messing with them due to the corrosion of their blood. In a few seconds, Gustav shredded them to pieces. Huff, 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 huff. Gustav breathed in and out profusely while transforming back into human form. His bare chest expanded and reduced occasionally. This was the first time he was in a fight against multiple mixed breeds. It really drained his energy to keep it up since he had only been facing one at a time in the past. Also, the energy points from the system were locked at the moment, so he was using his original stamina, which happened to be lower than the energy the system provided him with. Gustav looked at the disaster around him. Shredded red flesh in different areas. Some on the trees and others on the ground. The ground was also scorched black in some areas. Some trees even had small holes in them, and some had black spots. Gustav walked forward towards the shredded body of one of the solar worms. The best way to infiltrate that cave without having to fight them in huge numbers would be to look like them, Gustav analyzed internally as he arrived in front of the incomplete corpses. He squatted and reached out his hand to touch the corpse. Let's see if I can make use of bloodline acquisition without the system. Chapter 127. He squatted and reached out his hand to touch the corpse. Let's see if I can make use of bloodline acquisition without the system. Gustav's palm made contact with the body of the shredded body, directly pushing his hand into the bloody part. Squelch. It made some funny noises as Gustav's palm dipped into it. The blood from the corpse of the solar worm had been exposed to air for quite some time and had lost a lot of its corroding quality, so Gustav hardly felt any pain after dipping his hand in it. Gustav closed his eyes and tried recollecting the feeling of withdrawing a bloodline from a body. His breathing became steady and his concentration increased to the max. After a few seconds, he felt a weird kind of reaction and opened his eyes to stare at his arm. His veins had bulged out of his skin and were extending forward towards his fingertips. His fingertips were lodged deep into the corpse of the solar worm. He remembered that this was the same phenomenon that occurred when he was sucking the bloodline from the body of others. Gustav focused on the bulged-out veins that traveled to his fingertips and tried drawing the bloodline of the solar worm out. Moments turned to seconds and seconds turned to minutes. Before Gustav knew it, 10 minutes had gone by, and he was still unable to draw out the bloodline of the solar worm. Gustav moved his hand to another body part and tried again. He focused on drawing out the bloodline once again, but he was met with the same situation, failure. Gustav started moving from one corpse to another while trying to draw out their bloodline. As time passed, he had dipped his hand into the shredded corpse of more than 7 solar worms, and it was still the same result. Gustav decided to stop. Sigh. I guess without the system, bloodline acquisition is impossible. Gustav came to this conclusion after failing several times. He thought he would be able to make it work since he was able to figure out how to trigger the veins that sucked out the bloodlines from the body of others, but no matter how he tried, he couldn't draw out the bloodline of the solar worms. It felt like something was blocking him from completing the process, and he could tell that it was because of the absence of the system. Gustav wondered about what he could do to get into the cave without being noticed. Even after thinking for a long time, Gustav couldn't come up with any good ideas. The only ones he thought up needed him to change his skin color to match that of the caves when he entered. To do this, he'd have to be stark naked, but that wasn't the problem now. The problem was the solar worms sensed their environment using temperature, and the temperature of humans, Slarkovs, or mixed bloods were a lot different from solar worms, which meant that coming into contact with any one of them would expose him immediately. The system upgrade was still at 40%, so it would still take a few more days before it got to 100%. While Gustav was thinking about the best possible plan, he suddenly sensed movement from the southeast part of the forest. Why is there another one headed here? Gustav muttered with a surprised expression. He walked forward while thinking of how to kill the creature headed for him in the fastest way possible. Gustav suddenly paused again. Not 1. Not 2. Not 5. Gustav's face showed a wary expression as his perception spread across the place. A horde? Just as Gustav mentioned this with a shocked look, the ground started to vibrate. At first, it was a soft vibration, but as time passed, it increased in intensity. Gustav wasted no time in turning around and running as fast as his legs could carry him. He took the form of the partial blood wolf he used earlier and activated dash manually to boost his speed. Swoosh! Behind him was a horde of solar worms coming from the direction of the cave. They all had their bloodline activated, so their movement carried an intense heat wave as they traveled. Even the living things in the environment that had adapted to the heat couldn't handle this. A lot of trees in the vicinity were already getting smoked while some turned to ash. Gustav had already sensed the intense heat wave before it arrived, so he had to run for his life. More than 100 of them, coming to avenge the death of their kind. Gustav never knew that they could sense if their kind died. If he had known, he would have left earlier, but now he had to run as fast as he could to escape the heat wave. With his distance from them being a bit longer, it would take some time before they would catch up to him, but the same couldn't be said for the intense amount of heat wave they were bringing along with them. The heat wave was literally like 20 feet behind Gustav as he bolted across the place madly. If the first layer of the heat wave came into contact with him, he would turn into cooked meat. Swoosh! Gustav swerved from left to right and right to left while running forward and dodging the trees. Feeling like the ground was slower than the air due to the number of trees he had to dodge each time, Gustav leaped up. Thump! Grab! He grabbed a branch and swung further forward before landing on another tree branch ahead. Tum, 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 tum. He kept jumping from tree to tree for a few minutes until the forest of tall trees started becoming sparse. The trees within the area reduced as he further jumped ahead before he arrived at a wide opening. Bam! Gustav jumped down from the last tree within 100 feet radius of him. The border could already be seen in front. Since he was faster than the solar worms, he had already gone way ahead of them, but remembering just how crazily they attacked because of the death of their kind made Gustav feel uneasy. He didn't waste any more time before performing the same ritual he used to enter the border earlier. This time it was done with a faster speed. When the border opened up, Gustav darted through it. Swoosh! It closed up when he arrived on the other side. Chapter 128. Within the border, the solar worms came to a stop after they arrived in front of the sparse forest area. They looked around for the assailant that dealt with their kin, but Gustav was nowhere to be found. Gustav had spent close to 2 hours in there, and almost forgot that he still had to patrol the neighborhood in case of mixed breeds that might appear, although he had doubts about them appearing today. Looks like he'll have to wait till the system finishes its upgrade before heading there. Gustav sighed in defeat once again after remembering what just happened some minutes ago. He knew the solar worms were aggressive due to the information he sourced for, but he never knew they were as aggressive and unforgiving as this. Other species would definitely leave him after he traveled a particular distance, but these ones kept following him. Also, he doubted he would survive for long due to the scorching heat, so infiltrating their cave right now would be a death task. Gustav went ahead to patrol the neighborhood for the night. 2 days later, Gustav woke up in the morning and the first thing he saw was, "System upgrade complete." Gustav sighed in relief after seeing this. He could finally put his plans into motion. Now he noticed how reliant he had been on the system, but he was also glad that he was able to train himself when the system was unavailable. This way, if anything like this ever happened again, he would be able to handle the situation better. The last 2 days were spent training himself, and he had progressed a lot. He created a new skill using atomic disintegration without the help of the system. He wanted to see if the skills he had learned in the past 3 days would be added to the system. Also, he wanted to know what changed about the system. He wanted to open the system interface, but before he could, notifications started to pop up in his line of sight. New attribute unlocked, vitality. New attribute unlocked, endurance. New skill unlocked, super jump. New skill unlocked, combination. Shop function is now operational. Host can now increase stats and levels of abilities by exercising. Skills learned by host has been added to skills and attributes. Attributes added to God Eyes. Energy reading. New requirement has been attached to bloodline acquisition. System now has a history panel where information on bloodlines can be checked. Goals panel is now available. Host can now gain EXP from killing humans, Slarkovs, mixed bloods. The list of notifications still went on and on, but Gustav paused at the part where it said, Host can now gain EXP from killing humans, Slarkovs, mixed bloods. He had a look of contemplation while staring at that particular notification for a while. Is the system pushing me to kill people now? Gustav muttered while walking around his room. After the attack that happened on our way back from Atrahia City, I can say for sure that lots of criminals still exist on the face of the earth, even though the MBO happens to be very active. If I'm gonna gain EXP from killing people, it will have to be such rotten people, Gustav added. Or maybe I should just become a mercenary instead. Gustav chuckled as he voiced out this thought. I am not powerful enough to handle such criminals for the time being, so farming EXP can only come from dealing with mixed breeds for now, and maybe some idiots who will decide to choose death on their own. Gustav walked towards the bathroom as he came to this conclusion. He decided to check the system interface while taking his bath. When Gustav was done with his bath, he prepared for school and walked out of his apartment after a few minutes. School today was pretty much uneventful again, except for rumors flying around about where the MBO entrance test would be holding. Originally, this information was never revealed until a few days to the MBO entrance test, but when Gustav remembered what Maltida said about big families getting access to such information earlier, he felt that there might be an iota of truth within the rumors flying around. Different locations were mentioned, so it was impossible to know which one was correct without guessing. Some said a volcanic mountain range, while others mentioned an extreme ice region located in another continent. There were still some other locations mentioned, but the majority of them believed that the first two were more likely. Gustav decided to ask Miss Amy for clarification on these rumors during their training session. You mean none of the rumors are correct? Gustav voiced out with a surprised expression. H&M? Miss Amy nodded slightly in affirmation. The real information never spread like this. Those that have the original information spread these rumors to keep the truth hidden, so they be the only ones who will benefit from it. Think about it. Why would they want to share such information with the public instead of keeping it under the wraps? If they keep it under the wraps, more people get to fail because they relied on the wrong information to prepare themselves for the test. If more people fail, it means their candidates get a higher chance of passing by indirectly eliminating a bunch of mixed bloods, and no one knows just how many potential mixed bloods will fail due to this. Only about 200 slots are available for mixed bloods trying to get enlisted into the MBO camp. Decrease in competition is what they want, Miss Amy explained. Gustav had a look of understanding now after hearing that. It was just like receiving information about topics that the test of a subject would be set from and proceeding to read only those particular topics only to reach the examination hall and see a different set of questions that are unrelated to the topics you read. I need to be careful of the information I believe. If not for Miss Amy, I would have been fooled also, Gustav said internally. Even though those test sites flying around in the rumors may be wrong, one thing I can assure you is the site is going to be very dangerous, Miss Amy stated. Gustav's face shone a contemplative expression after hearing that. He was originally lying on the floor while Miss Amy was seated beside him, but when he heard that, he sat up. Miss Amy, can't you just tell me the location? Gustav asked while turning to the side with a sneaky smile on his face. You shameless little prick, Miss Amy replied with a smile while slapping the back of Gustav's head. Gustav rubbed the back of his head with a playful and pained expression on his face. You don't need to know the location, Miss Amy said afterward. Gustav exclaimed with a look of confusion. I'm saying you need to know it. If you cannot pass the test without knowing the location beforehand, that means I wasted time training you, Miss Amy stated. This made Gustav feel even more intrigued, but he decided not to push it. What's the point of a test in the first place if you already knew the questions that will be asked? At nighttime, Gustav left his apartment for the border once again. Now that the system was accessible, he could increase his level and farm EXP from killing mixed breeds. Tonight, he also needed to infiltrate the cave of the solar worms, while also farming lots of EXPs, because he really needed it. Gustav arrived in front of the border and activated the skill he used to infiltrate it the last time. Swoosh! He dashed in with a look of determination on his face. I need to gather more than 1,000,000 EXP, or I'll never be able to purchase any item from the shop, Gustav muttered as he phased through the forest. Chapter 129. Gustav streaked through the forest, dodging a lot of trees along the way. In a few minutes, he had arrived in front of the cave again. He stood on a tree branch and observed the space in front of the cave for some time. The solar worms moving around the vicinity were up to 30 this time. Since they were fairly intelligent, they had increased defense in front of their abode, but even with that, Gustav was feeling more confident now that the system was accessible again. Now his defense stats were operational. The last time he was fighting with his normal body, but now that he had defense, he believed he might be able to hold on for longer. Still, he decided not to jump in like he did the other time. I have to lure one of them away, Gustav said internally. Energy is still stored in my gravitational field, but I cannot risk detonating it and drawing more mixed breeds to this place. Gustav canceled every thought he had of using gravitational energy container because he had no idea how many mixed breeds within the forest would be attracted to this place if he decided to detonate it. He couldn't guarantee that a more powerful mixed breed than he could handle wouldn't show up, so he decided to make this operation as quiet as possible. Skewy. The solar worms in the environment heard the sound of their kind coming from the east side of the cave entrance deep within the forest. They stared at one another for a while. Skewy. They heard the sound again. One of them in the environment made a sound similar to that in reply before heading in the direction of the sound. The others continued patrolling the environment. They weren't bothered since that was the sound of their kind. The solar worm traveled through the forest towards the sound of the voice. Skewy. It heard the sound again and followed it. Whenever it felt it was closing in on the sound, the next one would sound farther than the last. The solar worm kept moving forward and tracing the sound even though that happened 3 more times. It squirmed across the ground till it got to the front of a small bush. The bush wasn't that big, but it wasn't small either, however, it was very thick. This was where it traced the last sound. At the moment, it had traveled more than 7,000 meters away from the cave entrance. The solar worm raised its upper body and looked around for the other solar worm making that sound. Just as it raised its body to around 3 meters high, a silhouette suddenly dashed out of the small, thick bush in front. Slash, 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 slash. The solar worm didn't even get the chance to check out the silhouette before it was hacked to several pieces with blood and flesh flying in separate directions. The silhouette was obviously Gustav in his incomplete blood wolf form. He had taken the solar worm by surprise. He perfectly mimicked the sound of a solar worm earlier and kept drawing it into the forest to make sure that he was able to kill it without raising an alarm. He had already calculated the amount of time it took the solar worms to aware of the death of their kind, so he knew they won't be aware anytime soon, which gives him enough time to test out bloodline acquisition. You killed a level 4 solar worm, plus 8,000 EXP. Gustav squatted and placed his hand on the shredded body of the solar worm. Mixed breed corpse found. Solar worm. Host has met the requirements to absorb bloodline. Does host wish to collect this bloodline? Yes/no. Gustav stared at the notifications with a look of relief. He finally saw the notifications he had been missing for the past 3 days. Yes, Gustav answered immediately. Extraction process shall now begin. 1/100%. Gustav waited for about 1 minute before it was done. 100%. Extraction successful. He was pleasantly surprised. It was never this fast in the past. The least amount of time it took was 3 minutes, but this time it only took a third of that. This made Gustav wonder, when the system gets another upgrade, would the time spent on bloodline acquisition shorten even more? He felt that a time might come when he would be able to steal a bloodline instantly. Gustav decided not to think about it too much. He had a task at hand, and that took priority at the moment. Gustav activated his storage device and kept the body part of the solar worm within it. Solar worm transformation, Gustav said inwardly. His body suddenly bloated, and his skin began to turn red with yellow spots appearing at different parts. Gustav's body length increased also while his body bloated. His arms retracted into his body, and in a few seconds, he had transformed completely to look like the same solar worm he had just killed. His vision had changed along with his sense of smell. His sight was able to cover a range of 270% in this form. Gustav squirmed across the ground towards the location of the cave. Swoosh! He was still extremely fast in this form. In about a minute he arrived in front of the cave. The cave entrance was still being patrolled by the same amount of solar worms earlier. Gustav made those sounds the solar worms used in communicating with one another before entering the cave. On entering the cave, what appeared in Gustav's line of sight were glowing blue rocks protruding from the ceiling of the cave. Blue liquid dripped from the tip of some of them and fell to the ground before turning into small blue stones. Gustav noticed that these small blue stones were practically everywhere in the cave. Another thing that Gustav noticed was the pure energy flowing within this cave due to the stones. As expected, he could see a massive number of solar worms moving about within the cave. Some remained stationary at different parts. Some were moving on the walls of the cave, and some coiled around the pointy rocks on the cave ceiling. Chapter 130. The path Gustav was on right now within the cave was very wide and kept extending forward into the distance. Gustav really couldn't see anything out of the ordinary as he kept moving forward, but his plan right now was to check out every part of the cave. After he was done checking it out, whether there was anything suspicious about the cave, he would push forward his next plans to farm EXP. Gustav kept moving forward, and there were times he would see some worms mating. The manner in which they did it disgusted him, and he secretly thanked the stars that he wasn't a solar worm for real. One of the female solar worms around was even sending signals to him, but Gustav speedily distanced himself from her. In some minutes he had crossed several hundred meters. God Eyes. Gustav activated God Eyes while he was still in the form of the solar worm. God Eyes has been activated. The cave turned into a myriad of colors from his point of view. Every single solar worm that he came across had readings above their heads. Some had similar numbers while others didn't. Gustav stared at the stones up, and they happened to be bright green in color with different energy readings too. 2,000, 3,200. These numbers are too small for the next upgrade, Gustav analyzed. During the day, he had checked out the system interface and noticed that the system now had a bar where the amount of energy needed for the next upgrade was placed. It happened to be a very massive number, more than twice of what was needed earlier. Gustav had decided to absorb the energy within these rocks even though they were a far cry from what was needed in total. Gustav was already closing in on the ending of the cave after moving through it for about 5 minutes. His sight zoomed in on the ending of the cave where 3 different large holes could be seen on the walls. These holes were more like rooms because Gustav could see several solar worms inside, and he could also sense an immense amount of energy coming from all 3 of them. Skewy, skewy. Some of the worms outside the hole saw Gustav and shrieked at him. If Gustav didn't understand their manner of speech, he would have thought they had figured out that he was an imposter, but due to his current form he knew what they were saying. Skewy, skewy, skewy. Gustav replied as he squirmed towards the middle hole. Skewy, skewy. The 2 worms on the outside made those sounds at Gustav again while rotating their body. Gustav replied again with something similar before both worms moved out of the way for him to enter the hole in the middle. Gustav crawled towards it and got in. The space within the hole was big enough to fit 1,000 people, but only about 12 solar worms were inside. The flow of energy inside this hole was intense, and Gustav could tell that this one was way higher than the others he saw on the cave ceiling when he was on his way here. The hole would have been extremely dark, but there was a bright source of shiny blue light stationed in the middle. The blue light was actually a long crystal-like rock that protruded out of the ground. The crystal happened to be over 300 feet tall, glowing with refreshing light. The 12 worms within coiled themselves around a very large crystal-like rock. This is on another level compared to the others, Gustav said internally with a surprised look. 634,000? Gustav now understood why the solar worms had guards positioned on the outside of these holes. Earlier when he spoke to them he realized that this place was only accessible to a solar worm once in every 2 months, and once that solar worm stayed within any one of the 3 holes for a single day, their strength, along with their internal constitution, would undergo a fundamental improvement. High-energy crystal has been detected. In name. Salader Pure Crystal. If host wishes for the system to absorb the energy within this crystal, proximity range must not be farther than 2 meters. These notifications appeared in Gustav's line of sight as he closed in on the crystal. The 12 solar worms did not notice him since they were basking in the glow of the crystal. When he got to the required range, another notification appeared in his line of sight. Does host wish to absorb energy into the system? Yes/no. Gustav stared at the notification with a contemplative look. He could also absorb this energy into his gravitational space and keep it for emergencies, but the system seemed to be compatible with it. Gravitational energy container can absorb all kinds of energy, but the system can't. I should let the system have this. Gustav came to a decision and called out within his mind. Yes, he wasn't bothered about the 12 solar worms laying around the crystal since he got to the end of the cave. It was time to farm EXP. He already decided that he was going to kill every one of them there. The crystal just happened to be an unexpected additional price. Energy from Salader Pure Crystal will now be absorbed. Process. 1/100%. A blue stream of energy, as thick as a human body, extended out of the crystal towards Gustav. Process. 20/100%. Process. 57/100%. As the system absorbed the energy, the crystal was slowly getting dimmer. Process. 97/100%. Process. 100%. Energy has been successfully absorbed. The crystal dimmed completely as this notification appeared in Gustav's line of sight. The entire hole darkened due to that, and the solar worms within it opened their eyes and looked around in confusion. Inside the dark hole, the only visible thing was a pair of scarlet and green eyes that glowed ominously. Immediately after the hole dimmed earlier, Gustav had taken the form of the half-blood wolf. God eyes were still activated, so he could see clearly in the dark. Swoosh! He dashed forward, hiding under the cover of darkness. Before the solar worms could understand what was going on, sounds of meat being shredded reverberated across the space. Chapter 131. Skewy, skewy, skewy. The panicked cries of the solar worms were heard from outside, alarming the two solar worms at the entrance of the hole. Swee-eye, swee-eye. The two solar worms at the entrance squirmed towards the hole with speed. On entering into the hole, darkness along with the sounds of flesh being ripped to shreds and the smell of heated blood greeted them. The worms didn't understand what was happening, and they could only sense that there was some unknown being here, but the said being was moving too fast for them to pinpoint their location. Atomic disintegration code has been activated. -10 EP. Gustav's claws were covered in a whitish glow once again as he dashed out and hacked at the upper body part of a solar worm positioned on the left of the crystal. Slash has been activated ×3. Swai, swai, swai. Gustav's claws slashed out thrice, dividing it into 3 pieces. At this moment, Gustav had already killed 5 of the solar worms within the hole. Even though the temperature of the hole had increased by a lot due to their numbers initially being 12, Gustav was able to endure the increase. Not only was the temperature way lower than when he had to handle the 20 at the entrance the other day, but he also had defense now, so he was hardly disturbed by the increase in temperature. Swoosh, slash, swoosh, slash. Gustav dashed across the place while swinging out his arms repeatedly and ripping their bodies to shredded pieces of meat. The 2 solar worms that entered earlier started shooting out corroding silver liquids from their mouths. Thwai, 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 thwai. They couldn't really pinpoint Gustav's location, but they could sense him from time to time due to his temperature, but their attacks only hit thin air because Gustav could see them clearly and dodge, unlike them who had their visibility reduced. After a few more seconds, Gustav had killed the 12 solar worms he met here when he first arrived. He darted towards the 2 worms that were standing guard on the outside earlier. Both of them already sensed that he was headed towards them. Thwai, thwai. They shot out the steam of silver liquid towards Gustav's direction. Both attacks accurately headed for Gustav. Tum. Size manipulation has been activated. Gustav's body lessened in width, becoming about 5 inches wide, and he positioned himself right in between both attacks while dashed forward. Both attacks passed by his right and left side, missing him by a hairbreadth. -20 HP. Even though he dodged it, he still lost a little bit of HP due to the air becoming corrosive from the liquid they spat out. Swoosh. Gustav's body went back to normal after successfully dodging their attacks. He extended both his arms as he reached the middle of both solar worms. Slash. His right and left claws sliced through the sides of both worms as he kept running forward with his arms outstretched. Plurk. The bloodworms screeched out in pain as the sides of their upper body, their belly, and their lower halves were torn open, causing their internal organs to spill out along with a puddle of lava-like blood. Plop, plop. Both bodies of the solar worms fell to the ground as system notifications popped up in Gustav's line of sight. You killed a level 4 solar worm, plus 8,000 EXP. You killed a level 4 solar worm, plus 8,000 EXP. Now that he had killed all 14 of them, Gustav had now reached level 9. SSHHHSSS. Gustav stared at the corpses of the bloodworms with a contemplative look. Their bloods were already corroding the ground, causing a sizzling sound to ring out. I won't be cooking mixed breeds for dinner this time. Gustav stared at the mess around him with a repulsed expression. I wonder if any restaurants will be interested in buying their body parts. Gustav couldn't conclude on whether to take the bodies of these solar worms or not. After thinking for a few seconds, he picked them up and put them in his storage device before leaving the hole. He knew he had to be as quick as possible now that he had killed some of the solar worms. He reckoned that he only had about 30 minutes and quickly dashed into the third hole to continue. Just like the previous, the third hole also had a similar crystal and worm surrounding it. High-energy crystal has been detected, in name, Salader Pure Crystal. Just like in the previous hole, the same notifications popped up here. Gustav moved closer to the crystal, which was positioned on the right corner of the hole. Does host wish to absorb energy into the system? Yes/no? Gustav quickly said yes, and the system started absorbing the energy of the second crystal. After the system was done absorbing the energy, the same situation as the previous hole happened again. Gustav was already prepared for it. This time he didn't spend up to 5 minutes before killing all the solar worms within the hole. He kept calculating the amount of time left before the entire solar worms would start scurrying towards his location. Gustav quickly bolted out of the small hole and quickly moved towards the first hole. The first hole was where he sensed the energy to be higher and also at its purest form. Gustav dashed into the hole without any hindrance and was surprised to see something different from the other two. Instead of looking at the center of the hole or whatever, Gustav's sights were locked on the ceiling. On the ceiling, he could see the blue crystal similar to the ones he saw in the last two holes. The difference was, this was almost twice as large, 987,000. Gustav made use of God eyes to check the readings. It was absolutely higher than the previous two. If I'm able to absorb this, the system would have received 1/6 of the amount of energy it needs for the next upgrade, Gustav calculated, but it didn't look like it was going to be easy to absorb this one. The reason for that was, Gustav couldn't see several solar worms coiled around this one like the previous holes. Instead, there were only 2 of them on the ceiling. These 2 solar worms coiled around the large crystal with their eyes closed, oblivious to what was going in the surroundings, but they had noticeable differences from normal blood worms. These 2 were almost twice the size of a normal solar worm with redder skin and a kind of purplish scale growing on the upper part of their body. Gustav moved some steps forward while scrutinizing both worms. Even without the readings, he could tell that these 2 were not level 4 solar worms like the rest. Gustav moved forward to observe the worms more when one of them suddenly opened its eyes. Scurry. Unlike the rest, this one also sounded a bit different with a more refined tone. The one with the opened eyes happened to be coiled around the lower part of the crystal, but its shriek also woke the second one. They looked down at Gustav from high up with a menacing expression. Scurry. Scurry. Both solar worms shrieked together before bolting towards Gustav with speed from upwards. Swan. Swan. Both solar worms happened to be crazily fast with almost twice the speed of a normal solar worm. Gustav already sensed that they would be formidable, so he activated Sprint instantly. Sprint has been activated. Dash 20 EP. Swoosh. Gustav dashed towards the left, dodging both solar worms. Bam. Bam. The solar worms landed on the ground and immediately chased after Gustav, who had just finished dodging. Tom. One of them leaped in the air towards Gustav, while the other darted towards him with a wide-open mouth where hundreds of sharp, pointy teeth could be seen. The wide-open mouth was big enough to fit in 3 humans at the same time, and would easily rip them to shreds with a single gnash, so Gustav had no plans of being caught by it. He jumped backward by 75 feet, missing the first one that leaped into the air by a few feet. The one on the ground arrived in front of him from the left, and Gustav reacted by swerving further left. Shwai. Just as the solar worm's body was passing by his front after he dodged it, Gustav lowered his arms and poured as much strength as he could into it before slashing upwards with a lot of force. Swihai. Slash. Gustav's sharp claws, covered in whitish light, traveled forward with intensity, ripping apart the air. KRRYYHHRRR. When it made contact with the solar worm, it tore a 16 inches deep gash on its body, sending it flying several feet forward. What the? Gustav was surprised that he didn't manage to deal more damage than that since he used all of his strength in that attack earlier. Scurry. The solar worm shrieked out in pain after receiving that attack from Gustav, but that attack wasn't enough to severely harm it. Immediately it landed back on the ground. It dashed out crazily towards Gustav again. Chapter 132. The solar worm shrieked out in pain after receiving that attack from Gustav, but that wasn't enough to severely harm it. Immediately it landed back on the ground. It dashed out crazily towards Gustav again. Thwai. It shot out a wider stream of silver-like liquid that covered a width of more than 75 feet. This was practically a point-blank attack. Gustav, knowing that there was nowhere to dodge, transformed his hand back to normal immediately and straightened his palm before raising it. Chop has been activated. Atomic disintegration coat has been activated. Whitish light appeared around Gustav's palm before he swung it down with force. Suihai, a white arc of light similar in shape to the blade of an axe, shot out of his palm as it came down and started splitting the attack in two. Shuai. Gustav's body also shot forward while doing that as the divided streams passed by his sides. Unfortunately, he had misjudged the attack. His palm strike from the combination of chop and atomic disintegration was unable to divide the stream completely because, unlike the other solar worms, these two could shoot it out for longer. The rest of the liquid slammed into Gustav after his chop lost power. The intense force lifted Gustav off the ground and threw him backward. Bang! Gustav's back slammed into the wall on the other end of the hole. Ugh! Gustav exclaimed with a pained expression and fell to his knee after his back slammed into the wall. SSHHHSSS. His upper clothes had been burned off again, and his parts of his skin peeled off. That hurt, Gustav muttered slightly as he straightened his body. 200 HP. His arms and his entire upper body had been scorched by the attack. Gustav was practically in a sorry state as he breathed in and out profusely. Regeneration has been activated. Gustav's body started healing up bit by bit, but the solar worm was incensed after seeing that its attack failed to disintegrate Gustav. It dashed out again along with its partner towards Gustav. Even though Gustav had lost 200 horsepower due to that attack, he wasn't really in any danger. Even if he lost more, he still wouldn't be in any real danger. This is because his healing function will never stop until he ran out of energy, which meant his HP can't dwindle to zero until his energy points ran out. Amidst the scorching pain, Gustav swerved towards the left, dodging the first solar worm, who ended up slamming into the wall. Gustav was about to attack its opening, but before he could, the second one jumped high up again in a bid to use its entire body to crush Gustav with its weight. Thump! Gustav leapt backward, dodging the dropping body of the solar worm. Both worms had such great synergy, and Gustav guessed that must be attributed to the fact that they're mating partners. Gravitational imbalance has been activated. Gustav finally decided to activate a gravitational energy skill since the battle was taking longer than he wanted. The gravitational force around a circumference of 10 meters suddenly turned weird. The solar worms who had already dashed out suddenly felt like their bodies become heavier, decreasing their mobility. Due to the sudden change, they were distracted for a split second, which gave Gustav the chance to dash towards the one on the left. Before both of them could react, Gustav's right arm had already been thrown out with his palm transforming into that of the blood wolf's. Slash! His 4 claws accurately landed on the right eye of the worm, tearing 4 bloody lines on it. Skewy! The worm screeched in pain and started thrashing around while blood spilled out of its eyes. Gustav didn't stop moving. He dashed towards the second one on the side. He had injured this one earlier, so it was easy to land more hits on it due to its previously injured state. Gustav's claws were covered in the same white light as before as he repeated hacked at the upper body of this solar worm. Slash! 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 His claws tore deep gashes across the body of the worm in a few moments, causing it to bleed out more. He wanted to slash at the solar worm again when the one on the side threw its body over, intending to slam Gustav against the wall. Swoosh! Gustav leaped towards the side and kicked the wall with his right leg, causing his body to propel further into the air as he spun repeatedly in midair to dodge the body attack. At this point, one of the solar worms had lost its right eye while the other was already severely injured and bleeding out. Skewy! 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 Outside the cave, the solar worms around suddenly started shrieking loudly to one another. Some of them squirmed back and forth across the vicinity for a few seconds before turning around to face the cave. Skewy! Skewy! They made those weird noises at one another again before darting towards the cave. Inside the cave, the same situation as outside was playing out. The solar worms within the cave stopped whatever they were doing at the moment and started heading towards the end of the cave. The sound of their wriggling bodies moving across the ground gave off a weird and creepy feeling. Gustav continued engaging the 2 solar worms, unaware of the multitude of solar worms headed for the hole. At this moment, he had inflicted severe injuries on them both, but they still had enough vigor in them to last for a while. His body had also healed up completely, but he hadn't been able to kill them both yet. Damn it, I have 1 minute left till they storm this place, Gustav said internally with a frustrated look. He had been calculating the time he spent fighting the two solar worms, and he figured that the solar worms should be aware of the death of their kindred in a minute time. I don't have a choice anymore. I have to use it. Gustav's face shone resolve as he said this internally. Energy, 140/1750. Not only was he low on time, but his energy was almost completely spent. Chapter 133. Both injured solar worms were still headed towards him with animosity. Gustav jumped backward about 3 times before running towards the left. Although the worms wondered why he suddenly went defensive, they still chased after him. They were the aggressive type, so Gustav inflicting injuries on them triggered their anguish. Gustav suddenly came to a pause when he got to the middle of the space. The worms still bolted towards him crazily, even though their speed wasn't as great as before. Gustav stared at them, approaching with a concentrated look. Immediately, they were 6 meters away from reaching him. He activated a skill. Super jump has been activated. -30 EP. Gustav squatted slightly with speed before jumping into the air. Thump. 6 feet crack appeared on the ground surface as his body lifted above the ground with extreme speed. Swee-eye. He arrived at the ceiling of this space in an instant. The ceiling of the cave was 23 meters away from the ground, but Gustav crossed that height in a second. The solar worms got to the spot where Gustav leaped out from. At the same time, he grabbed onto the huge crystal with both his palms, using it to suspend himself in midair. He gritted his teeth and called out within his mind, "Energy discharge 2%. Energy discharge has been activated. -2% energy from gravitational field." A red wave of energy suddenly blasted out of Gustav's body. Bang! It covered a circumference of 12 meters, causing the ceiling of the cave to shake. The solar worms looked up in awe, only to notice the tip of a large pointy blue crystal headed towards them from above with intense speed. Gustav happened to be at the top and was holding onto the large crystal. Zwarnen! The solar worms tried to escape, but before they could move further than 2 feet, the gigantic crystal tip slammed onto one of them with intensity, impaling it completely and penetrating deep into the ground. Boom! Blood splattered across the place as the solar worm was blasted open due to the incident that had just occurred. The entire crystal was more than 8 meters long and wider than 3 human bodies combined, but its tip was only palm-sized. Due to the force at which it fell along with the combined weight of Gustav, it didn't just penetrate the solar worm. Instead, it caused it to explode into blood and gore. You have killed a level 6 solar worm. Plus 20,000 EXP. The notification rang out in his mind as he jumped down from the glowing crystal. High-energy crystal has been detected. Name: Salader Pure Crystal. Does host wish to absorb energy into the system? Yes/no. These notifications had already appeared in Gustav's line of sight from the moment he leapt upwards, but he ignored it. The crystal was still looking extremely beautiful and glowing brightly even though its tip was covered in corrosive blood. Gustav dashed out again towards the other solar worm. Immediately, he jumped down from the crystal. The solar worm that he just killed was in a much better condition than the one that was alive right now. They had been taking advantage of their numbers to battle with Gustav earlier, but now that one had been annihilated, he would be able to focus on dealing with only this one. Gustav rained down a massive number of slashes on the last solar worm, adding to the grievous amount of injuries it already had. In another 20 seconds, the solar worm breathed its last and fell to the ground with blood dripping out of its cuts like a fountain. You have killed a level 5 solar worm. Plus 14,000 EXP. Gustav didn't dwell on the notifications. He immediately dashed towards the crystal. Just as he arrived in front of it, he sensed the approach of solar worms in multitudes. He could hear them dragging their bodies across the ground as they headed towards this location with speed. Gustav quickly reached out for his pocket with a look of urgency and brought out a button-like storage device. The solar worms were speeding towards the 3 holes at the end of the cave as the bloody scent of their kind wafted across the air. Immediately, the solar worms arrived at the entrance of the hole. The large crystal disappeared from its spot. Zing! The space immediately became pitch black. The Salader crystal glow always kept the space within the hole bright. Now that Gustav had kept it inside his storage, the place turned dark. Skewy, skewy, skewy. The solar worms made shrieking sounds as they dashed into the 3 holes despite the darkness. They confirmed the death of their leaders and kin and proceeded to start thrashing around the place, looking for the culprit. They sensed the presence of an intruder earlier, but now it had disappeared. Under the guise of the darkness, Gustav had transformed into a solar worm and used the commotion to leave the cave. Many other solar worms were still arriving as he was squirming his way through them. Originally, he would have aroused suspicion, but the worms arriving didn't try to question him. The loud voices of the solar worms announcing the death of their leaders and kin had traveled all across the cave. Gustav kept moving for about 5 minutes more before arriving at the entrance of the cave. The entrance of the cave was empty at this moment. Gustav moved further into the forest for several hundred meters more before transforming back into his human form. He leaped up and landed on a branch before squatting and staring in the direction of the cave. The cave was several hundred meters from his position. He activated God Eyes and zoomed his sight so he'd be able to see the entrance of the cave clearly in the dark of night. They're all in now. I wonder how many it will end up killing, Gustav said internally as his mind linked with what he kept within the 3 holes. Inside the first hole, more than 100 solar worms had gone in. Inside the second and the third hole were the same. Those that didn't go in were patrolling the vicinity. Suddenly, a large glowing sky blue circle appeared in midair within the 3 holes. The glowing blue circles were the size of a human head. Red electrical streaks kept swimming around them. The worms stared at the glowing circles in awe, wondering what it was. In Gustav's position, his eyes were still focused on the cave entrance. Detonate, he muttered with a low tone. Chapter 134. Within the holes, the glowing blue circles suddenly increased in brightness and expanded immensely. The red electric arcs circulating around them also became extremely unstable and flashed brightly while spreading across the surroundings. The worms sensed the impending doom, but before they could try to escape from the holes, boom! The glowing circles exploded with intensity, incinerating the environs and the solar worms along with it. Crumble. Crumble. Gustav's mouth hung slightly opened as he stared at the cave crumbling to fragments and dust right before his very eyes. The blasts were so powerful that he felt the force from his location. The tree he was standing on and the rest in the surroundings vibrated intensely as a cloud of dust covered the surroundings. The energy from the border is this powerful? When Gustav was leaving the holes one after the other, he planted a little bit of the energy he absorbed from the border. He placed it in a gravitational field that only he could sense. Gustav was surprised by how much devastation it caused. This further put him in a dilemma about the mixed breeds escaping from the border. You have killed a level 4 solar worm, plus 8000 EXP. You have killed a level 4 solar worm, plus 8000 EXP. You have killed a level 4 solar worm, plus 8000 EXP. Level up. You have killed a level 4 solar worm, plus 8000 EXP. The notifications kept ringing in his ear over and over, giving him a feeling of gratification. He was glad the gravitational energy bloodline worked well this time. He had been training himself on how to control and use it effectively, but he wasn't quite there yet. He even felt reluctant to use the 2% energy discharge skill in his battle against the solar worm leaders. He was glad it worked out fine this time because there were times when he tried it out during training and things went really south. I have to leave now. Gustav recalled that this blast would definitely attract other mixed breeds towards this location. He quickly turned around and started jumping from tree to tree with speed. 20 minutes later, Gustav had arrived outside the border. He had spent more than an hour dealing with the solar worms. He quickly ran towards the direction of the neighborhood to make sure that no mixed breed had escaped the border during his time in the cave. As Gustav streaked past the trees in the sparse forest area, he suddenly sensed something in the distance. Around 70 meters ahead was an oversized yellow-colored bunny, hopping towards the neighborhood at fast speed. Looks like one did manage to leave through the border while I was dealing with the solar worms. Gustav's eyes zoomed in on the 13 feet tall bunny. He was glad he finished up with the solar worms earlier than last time. If he had taken longer to deal with them, this mixed breed would have caused havoc in the neighborhood. His mind was once again plagued with the question, how do they keep escaping through the border? Remembering the amount of destruction the energy from the border caused, Gustav was sure that these mixed breeds were definitely getting help from somewhere. As Gustav closed in on the bunny, it also noticed him. Roar. The bunny roared with a loud voice, causing a spiraling sonic wave to shoot out of its mouth towards Gustav. Within the border at the site of the cave, scattered rock fragments could be seen in the vicinity. The air reeked of burnt flesh, and a view of destruction was displayed. The former glorious-looking cave was nowhere to be found right now. Within the vicinity of the crumbled cave, the silhouette of a 7-feet-tall man in dark clothing was visible under the glow of the moonlight. Every part of his body was covered up. Black cloak, black boots, and full black mask which covered even his hair up. Even the presence he carried was a dark one that wasn't easily noticeable. He squatted in front of the crumbled cave with his index finger placed on the ground. I wonder what a mixed blood is doing within the border. The man muttered with a husky voice as a red glow coated his fingertip. Troyan. A red ripple spread from the point where his finger touched the ground to the surroundings. It kept spreading till it covered a circumference of more than 300 meters. Red glowing footsteps started appearing. These footsteps were human-shaped. They kept appearing in multiple numbers, extending deep into the forest. So it's a kid, the man muttered as he slowly stood up. But how did it get into the border? He turned around to stare at the red glowing footsteps that extended into the forest. At a particular distance, the footsteps changed from the ground to the trees. A serial ranked should be unable to cause such destruction, he said while turning around to stare at the destroyed cave again. Weak but abnormal. Very abnormal. The man turned around and started heading in the direction of the footsteps. What an unexpected variant, he muttered with a frustrated tone before vanishing straight into thin air. Back in the sparse forest area, Gustav was currently engaging the bunny mixed breed. Several trees had been blasted down due to their battle, but the bunny happened to be seriously injured and bleeding from the head. Gustav was currently standing on the left shoulder area of the bunny and raining barrages of punches down on its head, causing it to bleed even more. He didn't pity the bunny in any way and kept pounding its head with punches. Unlike normal bunnies, this particular one was far from being cute. Its ears were like pointy black horns. Its eyes glowed an ominously dark color, and it had multiple fangs that were more than 6 inches long. Its muscular and tall body was enough to chase anyone away in fright. Apart from all these, whenever the bunny roared, the surroundings would be destroyed due to the sonic waves its voice generated. Chapter 135. Gustav was starting to wonder how the earthlings of the past called bunnies innocent and cute because he couldn't find an ounce of cuteness or innocence in the mixed breed he was currently engaging. Bam, 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 bam. Gustav's fist slammed onto the side of its face repeatedly while the bunny kept thrashing around in pain. It raised its hand and tried grabbing Gustav for the umpteenth time. Gustav leaped and landed on the other shoulder, which enabled him to dodge the swinging arm of the bunny. The bunny ended up slapping itself once again as Gustav started raining another set of punches on the other side of its face. Bam, bam, bam. This is amazing. After leveling up to this point, my normal strength is now able to deal with level 3 mixed breeds easily, Gustav said internally as he threw his fist back and forth repeatedly. He could sense his strength really improved after leveling up severally earlier. From the information he had gathered about mixed breeds, he knew that this bunny had the strength of a level 3 mixed breed. Originally, it would take 2 Step 3 Zulu ranked mixed bloods or 1 Step 4 Zulu ranked to defeat a mixed breed on this level, but now Gustav could do it easily, and he wasn't even at Step 2 yet. Roar. The bunny roared in pain again, causing sonic waves to shoot out of its mouth. Bang, bang. 2 small trees were blasted to smithereens. It originally tried to aim at Gustav, but it was impossible to hit Gustav at that angle. After a few more minutes, the bunny fell to the ground and succumbed to death. Its black eyes turned gray as brown blood flowed out of its head. 2 fist-sized holes could be seen on both sides of its head. You have killed a level 3 demonic sonic bunny. plus 4,000 EXP. Plop. Gustav landed on both feet after finishing off the bunny. Should I take its bloodline? It doesn't seem very useful, Gustav wondered. The bunny wasn't very strong physically, but its sonic roar was pretty powerful. It never hit Gustav since he was able to dodge every of its attack, but he could tell that head take quite the damage if one of its sonic attacks had made contact with him. My storage device is nearly filled up. I'll need to get another one after storing this. Gustav picked up a blue button from his pocket and tapped on it twice. The corpse of the bunny disappeared with a flash of blue light after he performed that action. They'll decide later, Gustav said internally and started patrolling the environment. He knew another mixed breed was unlikely to appear, but he wasn't going to risk it. Nothing was certain, especially after the whole fiesta he had with the neighborhood when another mixed breed appeared while he was away in Atrahia City. 3 hours later, Gustav was returning to his apartment. It was already midnight, so his job was over for the night. I need to reschedule the time I visit the border. Going during the night will affect my work, Gustav said internally as he climbed the stairs. His reason for thinking this way was due to what happened this night. If he went during the day, he could patrol the neighborhood during the night without any form of distractions. Gustav got to the top floor in a few seconds and was walking through the corridor when he noticed someone standing in front of his apartment. He kept walking forward without any form of wariness on his face. The person also noticed him and turned to the side to face him. "Shouldn't you be asleep by now?" he asked as he arrived in front of the person. The person standing in front of his door happened to be Angie. She was in red shorts and a blue singlet. It was nighttime, so a lot of her body parts were exposed, including her smooth cleavage, causing her to look appealing. Her fingers fidgeted as she twirled her hair in a shy manner while smiling at Gustav. "I wanted to talk to you," she said. Gustav could sense the seriousness in her voice, so he didn't question her about the timing anymore. Both of them sat in front of Gustav's door and leaned their back on his door. "He didn't invite me in," Angie said internally with a look of disappointment. She had expected that Gustav would tell her to come in so they could talk, but instead, he proceeded to sit in front of his apartment and she had to join him. What she didn't know was Gustav was thinking about the current time. It was the middle of the night, so Gustav felt it would be inappropriate to invite her in at this time. "So what was it you wanted to talk about?" Gustav broke the silence after noticing that Angie didn't speak for a while. "Gustav, will you?" Angie turned to face him and grabbed his right hand. "Will you? If I change, will you remain my companion even within the MBO camp?" she asked with a pleading look. "Change? What type of change?" Gustav asked with a curious gaze. "Well, let's say I become a little more ruthless. Will you still discard me?" Angie asked while turning her face away. It depends on the subject of your ruthlessness. If it's to your enemies, then you can be guaranteed that I won't break ties with you," Gustav replied with a profound gaze. Angie slowly let go of Gustav's hand as her face shone unwillingness. "I want to try, but I don't know if I can ever come to terms with hurting someone," she said softly while staring at the floor. "Look, Angie, I'm not asking you to hurt or be ruthless to just anyone, but when it comes to people who have the intention of harming you, it's either you or them. If you decide to pull your punches, that means you've chosen to be their punching bag, which is pretty stupid." Chapter 136. Even though you're a kind-hearted person by nature, there should be a limit, and you have to understand that not everyone deserves your kind-heartedness, Gustav lectured. "He sees me as a kind-hearted person?" Angie felt her heart flutter when she heard Gustav say that. She turned to stare into his eyes, which showed sincerity. Gustav stood up and dusted his trousers after saying that. "You're coming with me in the evening for the observation, right?" Gustav asked while staring at Angie. Yes," she replied while standing to her feet also. "Good, be prepared," Gustav said and turned around to open his door. "Prepared for what?" Angie asked with a look of curiosity. "You'll see when the time comes. Go to bed," Gustav said as he walked into his apartment. All right," Angie answered. "Good night, Gustav," she added while turning around. "Good night, Angie," Gustav replied to her as his apartment door closed up. Gustav got in and immediately went to shower. Tonight had been a very long one for him. Dealing with the solar worms, managing to absorb energy from 2 energy crystals, killing more than 100 of the solar worms and destroying their cave, lastly defeating the bunny mixed breed. His energy was nearly depleted in the fight against the level 5 and 6 solar worms, but he regained it after leveling up several times. If his energy was still low after leaving the border, it would have taken him longer to deal with the bunny, or he would have gotten defeated by it. Gustav stood underneath the shower as today's events replayed in his mind. He realized that there were lots of things he didn't put into account when dealing with the solar worms. Also, after the second battle, he retraced the steps of the mixed-breed bunny to the east side of the border. Both times he infiltrated the border was through the west, but now he had decided to infiltrate the border through the east next time. What still bothered him was the fact that the border on the east was also properly closed up. He didn't find openings of any kind, yet there were signs that the bunny came from there. It was almost as if it phased through the wall of green and red lines, which Gustav believed was impossible. Some mixed bloods had the power of intangibility, but security protocols were put in place for that. It was impossible to use that power to go in or out of the border. Gustav felt like there was a mysterious force at work here. He decided he was going to tell Miss Amy about it, but he had to think of a way to tell her without revealing some things. Open system interface, Gustav said internally. Host attributes, skills and abilities, bloodlines, quests, shop, goals, bloodline information, host attributes, name, Gustav level, 12 class, EXP, 580, 800/650 000 HP, 5400/5400 energy, 1700/1750 attributes, strength, 50 perception, 49 mental fortitude, 49 agility, 49 speed, 62 bravery, 49 intelligence, 49 charm, 49 defense, 49 vitality, 9 endurance, 9 attributes points. 40. Gustav stared at his stats with a look of gratification. Although he only moved up by 3 levels this night, this was the fastest he had ever leveled up in almost 5 months. When his strength stats got to 50, he felt a substantial increase in strength, as if 10 points were suddenly added, but only 1 point was added in reality. He clenched his fist with force. I never knew that a day would come where my strength would reach such a level. Gustav recalled how pathetic he was about 5 months ago. This system has really turned my fate around, but where does it originate from? The origin of the system was a mystery that Gustav wanted to solve in the future when he became powerful enough. He had tried initiating a conversation with the system severally, but it still ignored him. Remembering what happened on the mountain with the star slamming into the cliff area, Gustav couldn't help but think that the system had alien origins, but there was no way to confirm that right now. Add 10 points to vitality and endurance. 10 points have been added to vitality. 10 points have been added to endurance. After adding points to both of the new stats, Gustav closed the system interface and opened the shop. Shop. Credits. 100. Bloodline items. Bloodline recipes. Bloodlines. Skills. Abilities. Training manuals. Gustav stared at the tabs that were displayed in the shop. He had checked everything here during the day, so he already understood what each tab on was for. Bloodline items was where the system recommended items that would assist him in using his bloodline properly. It was like a guide. Bloodline recipes was where he could buy manuals that included different recipes and concoctions needed to improve his bloodline or the bloodline of others. Thousands of them had different purposes. The bloodline tab happened to be where he could buy different types of bloodlines and have the system inputted in him. Skills and abilities, just as their names implied, were where he could buy different skills and abilities. Training manuals was where he could buy different manuals that helped in training himself, and this was currently the only tab that had items that he could afford currently. The other tabs had crazy prices that Gustav couldn't afford right now. He knew it would take him some time before he could gather enough credit to purchase things from other tabs. I got 100 credits from amassing 1 million EXP this night. It's pretty small, but it's enough to get something for training, Gustav said internally, and proceeded to call for training manuals to open up. Shop. Training manuals. Breathing control, 300C. Boxing techniques, 50C. Battle movement martial techniques, 250C. Force control, 500C. Underwater battle technique, 1000C. Energy control, 100C. 6 paths, 2000C. Hundreds of them still extended further down. Some of the items here were very expensive while some were very cheap, but Gustav already set his sights on a particular one since when he first checked. He couldn't buy it then, but now he had enough credits to make a purchase. Purchase energy control, Gustav muttered with an excited tone. Energy control has been purchased. 100C. A bright golden glow suddenly appeared in the middle of Gustav's forehead. He suddenly felt a massive amount of information flowing into his mind. The contents of this information were about energy control. Images, texts, and different scenarios flowed into his mind in waves, all divided into several categories. After a minute had gone by, these pieces of information had been downloaded into his mind. Wow! Gustav exclaimed with an astonished expression. He didn't expect the information to be directly uploaded into his mind. When the process was happening, he kept wondering, what if I forget it? The information was pretty bulky, so he thought he might forget a bunch of them before he managed to finish learning all. But now that the process was over, he didn't have those thoughts anymore. The information was directly installed into his mind in such a way that he only needed one thought to picture everything. He was sure that he wouldn't be able to forget it even if he tried to. Chapter 137. These pieces of information are pretty detailed. I can tell there will be an improvement in my control of gravitational energy when I start learning this, Gustav muttered with a look of anticipation. He closed the training manual tab and opened that of Bloodline. Shop. To Bloodlines, Aqua Adaptation. Grade C, 30000C. Adapt to Aqua Life and use Aqua-related abilities. Mutated Lizard Transmutation. Grade B, 20000C. Release venomous gas while in the form of a mighty lizard. Wind Body, Grade B, 25000C. To become and manipulate the wind. Rock Manipulation, Grade D, Phi, 000C. Manipulate any form of rock. Ephelis, Grade A, 50000C. Take on the alien form Ephelis and use their abilities. Fiery Constitution, Grade C, 33000C. Having the internal structure of fire, ability to manipulate and resist fire. Radioactive Distribution, Grade A, 45000C. Manipulation of radiation. Gustav could see hundreds of bloodlines with different prices along with their information being displayed. Some were very expensive while some weren't as expensive as the others. Regardless, Gustav couldn't even afford the bloodline with the lowest price. Still don't understand the weird prices. Gustav had a confused look as his sight kept scrolling down. He was wondering why some C-grade bloodlines were expensive than some B-grade. He had a vague idea in his mind about what the reason might be, but the only way to confirm it was by purchasing the bloodline, which he couldn't right now. According to the system, I could still get credits by trading EXP, but that means my level will be reduced. It took me so long to level up to this point, so that isn't an option right now, he muttered with a look of contemplation. When Gustav first checked out the shop, a notification was displayed about how the shop works. From there he found out about how credits are attained. That was also how he discovered that 1 million EXP would get him 100 credits. He also discovered that he could trade EXP for credits. If he wanted to get 100 credits at the moment, 1 million EXP would be deducted, but if that happened, his current level would reduce. Gustav was reluctant to do that since leveling up hadn't been easy, so he decided he would get credits the normal way, which is by killing more mixed breeds and farming EXP. Gustav had his eyes on some of the bloodlines here which looked pretty interesting to him, but before he would be able to amass enough credits, he would need to farm lots of EXPs. Gustav closed the shop interface and opened goals next. Goals: kill 500 mixed breeds, 321/500, read 100 books, become independent, pick a new household name, Oslav, times save 100 lives, 2 out of 100, join a powerful organization, learn a dancing skill, defeat a higher-ranked mixed blood, travel into outer space. Picking a new name is something I haven't thought of yet. Looks like even the system doesn't want me bearing that name. Gustav chuckled lightly. There were more than 1,000 goals, and out of everything, he had only completed about 3 of them. Seeing the goal, save 100 lives, made Gustav wonder if the system was hinting at something. Yes, he planned on saving lives after joining the MBO and attaining strength, but he didn't want to be forced to do it. He wanted to save lives at his convenience and save whoever he wished to save. It didn't really seem like the system was forcing him to do that the moment, which made him feel glad, but he had a feeling that something like that could happen in the future, where the system would mete out punishment for not doing what it wanted. He once again decided not to overthink it. When the time came, he would make decisions then, since he couldn't think of a way to go against the system for now. Gustav finished showering and went to bed. He had scheduled his activities for tomorrow and believed it would be a productive day as well. The next morning, Gustav woke up and prepared himself for school once again. 40 minutes later, he arrived in school and went to the kitchen to work. Boss Danzo was pleased to see him again, and they exchanged pleasantries. The staffs were always jealous of Boss Danzo and Gustav's bond. Boss Danzo never showed such a wide and peaceful smile until Gustav arrived in the kitchen. Both of them stood in front of a large cooking equipment as they discussed. "Let's make a special dish today," Boss Danzo said with a smile. What do you have in mind?" Gustav asked. "The Tradashi dish," Boss Danzo replied. "Oh, what's the occasion?" Gustav asked with a surprised look. "Well, nothing much, just that my granddaughter, whose picture you've been masturbating to, happens to be a year older today," Boss Danzo said while chuckling. "Ha ha ha, Boss Danzo sure knows how to mess around." Gustav couldn't hold back his laughter after hearing that, even though he was surprised. Boss Danzo has a granddaughter for real? He had only been joking about using Boss Danzo's granddaughter picture to masturbate. He never knew that Boss Danzo truly had a granddaughter. Boss Danzo only looked like a middle-aged man, so Gustav still couldn't wrap his head around why a man who looked no older than 45 would have a grandkid. "Boss Danzo, is she maybe a year old?" Gustav asked with a curious gaze. "Pa." Boss Danzo slapped Gustav lightly at the back of his head upon hearing that. "Ouch!" Gustav rubbed the back of his head while shutting his left eye. "If she was a year old, wouldn't that make you a pedophile?" Boss Danzo asked while squeezing his face. "Haha, I guess that's true." Gustav laughed wryly while speaking. "How old is she then?" he added. "She's 17 years today," Boss Danzo replied with a proud smile. "Huh," Gustav exclaimed with a look of disbelief. 17? Boss Danzo nodded slightly in affirmation. "I have told her a lot about you, and she wishes to meet you in person," Boss Danzo added. "A lot?" Gustav's right eyebrow was raised slightly as he heard that. "How much did you tell her? By any chance did you mention that I use her picture to do that?" Gustav asked with an intrigued look. "Ha ha ha, you little rascal. Why don't you find out yourself?" Boss Danzo said while laughing lightly. "Find out myself? How?" Gustav asked. "We're having a small celebration at my place. Would you like to come?" Boss Danzo asked with a smile. "You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.